Chapter 51. This peerless skill of Ferd's had an advantage. It could be used continuously until his combat energy was depleted. Only then would the skill disappear. Of course, he could also stop the skill midway. Other people's skills required a certain amount of internal energy to be accumulated and then used. Once the accumulated internal energy was exhausted, the skill would disappear. If one wanted to use the skill again, they would need to accumulate internal energy again before they could use it again. At this moment, after Field had used his peerless skill, the entire passage was immediately filled with a situation where one man could hold back 10,000 enemies. Countless large-toothed rats were cut into pieces by the peerless skill. At this moment, Field was like a god of death. His body emitted a cold white light as he rushed towards the large-toothed rat. Although Field's peerless skill was powerful, these large-toothed rats seemed to be endless. They rushed out from the darkness. No matter how many large-toothed rats Field killed, it seemed to be useless. The peerless skill was incomparably powerful, but it also consumed a lot of combat power. Soon, Field's speed slowed down. Gradually, the white light around him disappeared. In the next moment, Field's tall body fell to the ground. Raoul, who was standing on the side, already knew what would happen after Field used his peerless skill. After seeing Field fall down, he didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly rushed forward, grabbed him, and dragged him back. This was also because Field's peerless skill was so powerful that it destroyed a few meters in front of him. That was why Raoul had the chance to drag him back. After Raoul dragged Field back, Green and the Gale mercenary group's thief, Nico, came up from behind. Nico was a thief. He was used to using a dagger. Of course, as an experienced thief, he naturally wouldn't only be equipped with one dagger. He would definitely have another dagger as a backup. At this moment, Nico was holding a dagger in each hand, blocking the large-toothed rats rushing from the right. Green, on the other hand, was waving his two-handed sword to block the large-toothed rats rushing from the left. In the Gale mercenary group, other than Nico who used a dagger and Field who used boxing gloves, the rest of the people used long weapons. Therefore, this time, Nico was the only one who used a short weapon. Nico's pair of daggers flew up and down like two rays of white light dancing in front of him to deal with the charging megalodon rats. The megalodon rats that had rushed in front of Nico were pierced by the two white lights and fell to the ground. On the other hand, Green's situation was not good. The weapon he was using was a two-handed greatsword, which was naturally not short. The consequences of waving it in the passage were similar to Lowell's. It was extremely difficult to fight, and he was surrounded by dangers. The mercenaries at the back were anxious, but there was nothing they could do. The passageway was only so wide. It was still acceptable for two people to fight side by side. If there were more people, it would be easy to accidentally injure one another. The fierce wind mercenary group's archers paused. They drew their bows several times, trying to reduce the pressure on the two people in front of them. However, not a single arrow was released. The passage was too narrow. Even if his archery skills were very good, he didn't dare to act rashly. He was afraid that he would accidentally hurt the two people fighting in front of him. Although Green and Raoul both used long weapons, there was one difference between them. Green used a sword while Raoul used a mace. The sword in Green's hand had the effect of cutting, while Raoul's mace could only smash. Therefore, Grim still had a slight advantage in the battle with these megalodon rats. Although the situation was a little better than Raoul's, Green was still very depressed. Seeing that there were several megalodon rats rushing in front of him, Green didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly stabbed the two-handed greatsword in his hand. At the same time, he waved it up and down, killing several megalodon rats that rushed in front of him. At the same time, several megalodon rats that rushed toward Nico were stabbed one by one and sent flying to the side. It was also at this time that a megalodon rat that hadn't been stabbed to death by Nico, after being sent flying, unexpectedly rushed toward Green. At first, the two people didn't notice this. When Green noticed it, it was already too late. The megalodon rat had already jumped onto his leg. As soon as the megalodon rat jumped onto Green's leg, it immediately activated its eating function. Suddenly, Green felt a series of pain coming from his leg. It was so painful that he couldn't help but shout. He waved his hand hard and sent the megalodon rat flying. The megalodon rat that had just eaten was suddenly smashed into the wall. It then slid down the wall and fell to the ground, never to move again. Although the megalodon rat was killed, the damage it had caused to Green was still there. The megalodon rat ate very quickly. In just a moment it had caused a very big wound to Green. This huge pain made Green a little absent-minded. It was also during this moment that he was absent-minded that 5 megalodon rats rushed toward him from the ground and the wall. Green wanted to wave his greatsword to block, but it was already too late. Seeing that the situation was urgent, he didn't have time to think. He hurriedly withdrew one of his hands and suddenly shouted, "Lightning attack!" As soon as his voice fell, a dazzling white light appeared in the palm of his hand, flickering in the dark passage. As soon as the white light appeared, it immediately hit the body of a megalodon rat. After this megalodon rat was hit by the lightning, it immediately screamed and fell to the ground. Launching this lightning attack was only an act of desperation on Green's part. Green was a paladin. He could launch simple magic, which was those relatively low-level magic. Lightning attacks like this could only hit one target. The damage was not great, and it could only temporarily numb the target. Grimm's lightning attack was merely a subconscious reaction. Although the lightning attack struck down a megalodon rat that rushed over, Green knew that it was useless. This was because there were as many as 5 megalodon rats rushing toward him. Even if he killed one megalodon rat, there were still 4 megalodon rats rushing toward him. In desperation, Green could only do the same thing as Lowell. He threw away the greatsword in his hand and wanted to use his fists to deal with these megalodon rats. But just as Green threw away the greatsword in his hand, he suddenly realized that these megalodon rats that rushed toward him had run away. That's right. Not only did the 4 megalodon rats that rushed toward him run away, but even the megalodon rats that rushed toward him from afar also ran back while squeaking. Seeing this change, Green was a little confused. He didn't understand what had happened. Just as he was in a daze, Vice Commander Scott suddenly rushed up and shouted excitedly. Chapter 52. Scott, the vice captain of the Gale Mercenary Corps, was standing far away. He could see clearly and saw the problem at a glance. "Captain, it turns out that these rats are afraid of light." Afraid of light. Glenn repeated this sentence and immediately reacted. These megalodon rats ran away because they saw the white light on the lightning attack. Glenn looked at the empty passage in front of him. He felt that everything that had happened was like a dream. The large-toothed rats that had been rushing over like a tidal wave actually ran away just because he had launched a lightning attack. Wasn't this a bit too childish? Scott looked at the dark passage in front of him and said, "It seems that these rats have lived in the dark for a long time. It is possible that they were scared when they saw the white light." Glenn nodded. Other than Scott's explanation, there was nothing else that could explain why these sawtooth rats ran away. However, no matter what the reason was, it was a good thing that the rats ran away. Seeing that there was no danger in the passage, the mercenaries surrounded Glenn and Raoul and treated their wounds. After the wounds were treated, Glenn saw that everyone was very nervous. He ordered them to rest. Looking at the fragments of the rats on the ground, Glenn hesitated. Should he go in or not? Although these megalodon rats had run away, Grimm was certain that these little creatures must have hidden themselves somewhere. Who knew when they would come rushing back like a tidal wave? Thinking of the battle just now, if he had not subconsciously launched the lightning attack at that time, it would have been hard to say what would have happened. Although he wanted to go in and see what was inside, he was not alone. There were so many of his brothers here. What if they could not go back after entering the passage? What should he do? Glenn hesitated again. Raoul helped Field up and let him lean against the wall. At the same time, he gave him a thumbs up and praised him. I didn't expect that stupid skill of yours to be so powerful. Field heard this and was furious. He shouted weakly, Raoul, whose skill are you calling a broken skill? I'm saying that yours is a broken skill. Don't forget, when you were being bitten by those megalodon rats, it was my lousy skill that saved you. You bastard, if I knew you were this kind of person, I wouldn't have saved you no matter what. When Lowell heard this, he knew that he had misspoken and hurriedly said with a smile, Field, you know that's not what I meant. I just got used to calling you that. That's how I used to call you. It's not easy to change it. But don't worry, I won't care about that skill of yours anymore. Don't call it a lousy skill anymore. Field was so angry that his eyebrows jumped when he heard Lowell call it a lousy skill. But after thinking about it, he waved his hand weakly and said, Whatever. You can call it whatever you like. Glenn couldn't help but laugh as he watched the two quarreling endlessly. At this time, Scott came to his side and sat down. He stared blankly at the depths of the dark passage for a long time before slowly opening his mouth. Are we going to continue walking in? Glenn heard this and sighed. He pointed at the megalodon rats on the ground and said, Although their attack power isn't strong, there are too many of them. We can't kill them all. Scordell nodded silently, but didn't say anything. Glenn continued, Their numbers are a danger. The most dangerous thing about them is that they are too fast. Of course, the speed I'm talking about isn't just their running speed. There's another kind of speed that is even more frightening. Scott was curious when he saw Glenn's serious face. If Glenn had such an expression, it meant that the situation was very serious. He couldn't help but ask, These megalodon rats, what kind of speed is more frightening? Glenn gently touched his bandaged wound and said word by word, The speed of the megalodon rat's bite. Scott was even more curious when he heard Glenn's answer. He couldn't help but ask again, Are these megalodon rats' bite speed very fast? Glenn nodded. These megalodon rats can give you a big wound in the blink of an eye. At this point, the fear on Glenn's face became more intense. If we were to fall to the ground during a battle, with their eating speed, I'm afraid we would be eaten up before we could stand up. Scott's expression changed drastically when he heard this. If these megalodon rats could really cause such great damage, it would be too terrifying. He couldn't help but confirm again. These little fellas, are they really that powerful? Glenn nodded silently. After a while, he said, These megalodon rats are definitely very scary. After Glenn said this, the two of them lost interest in talking and the place fell into silence. After a long time, Scott asked slowly, Since these megalodon rats are so powerful, I think we should retreat. Glenn shook his head and said frankly, To be honest, if it were me, I'd definitely go in and take a look. At this point, Green turned his head and glanced at his brothers not far away before continuing. However, I'm not the only one, so I'd like to ask for everyone's opinion. If you're willing to go forward, you can follow me. If not, you can go forward. At this point, Glenn patted Scott's shoulder and said with a smile, If you're not willing to go forward with me, I'll have to trouble you to bring them back safely. When Scott heard this, he immediately refused. Captain, no, I can't let you take the risk. If you want to go, we'll go together. As long as you continue to go forward, I won't back out. Glenn shook his head. Scott, you don't have to take the risk with me. I know it's dangerous, but you also know that I'm a very curious person. The more dangerous a place is, the more I want to go in and take a look. Otherwise, even if I go back, I won't be at peace. Scott heard this and shook his head. I'm suggesting to back out, not because I'm afraid of death, and not because I'm not curious. I'm just thinking about the big picture, and I'm afraid that my brothers will suffer losses. At this point, Scott smiled. If there's a chance to take the risk, I definitely won't let go of it. At this moment, the archer of the Gale Mercenary Corps, Keaton, walked over with a smile. What are the two captains talking about? Chapter 53. Seeing Keaton coming over, Green pointed to his side and said with a smile, "Come, sit down and talk." Carlton nodded and sat down beside Green without hesitation. Glenn asked after Keaton sat down. "Scott and I were talking about whether we should leave or move on. Since you're here, tell me, should we leave or move on?" Hearing this, Caudun smiled and said, "I guess you two are talking about this." Keaton turned his eyes to the depths of the tunnel and said with a smile, "I think it must be very dangerous in here." Glenn nodded. "Just by looking at those large-toothed rats, we should be able to guess that there must be something more dangerous hiding in the endless darkness, waiting for an opportunity to strike." Keaton sighed. "I really didn't expect. When I first came out, I thought that the mission would be completed after finding the Nightmare Eagle. But I didn't expect to encounter so many things. Especially in this tunnel. No one would have thought that there would be so many large-toothed rats hiding in this tunnel. It's really surprising." Scott nodded. "Yeah, basically no one has been here before. It's understandable that no one has discovered it." Glenn suddenly said, "You're wrong. It's not necessarily that no one has been here before. Maybe many people have been here before." Scott was puzzled. If people have been here before, why haven't we heard of it? At the end of his sentence, Scott suddenly cried out. He turned to look at Glenn and asked in a trembling voice, "You mean?" Glenn nodded. "It's true that this place is far from Cold Moon City. But if we can find this place, I'm sure other mercenary groups can find it too. But we haven't heard anything about this place. This means," speaking of this, Green sighed and continued, "we haven't heard any news about this place. I think it's because those who came here never left." Hearing this, Caudun was also shocked. He subconsciously looked into the dark tunnel, as if some terrifying monster would rush out from the darkness at any time. Scott was stunned for a moment before asking hesitantly, "Commander, since you know that it's dangerous inside, why do you still want to go in and take a look?" Green smiled and patted Scott's shoulder. He then turned to look at the dark passage. "Scott, my good brother, don't you know that the more dangerous a place is, the more likely it is to hide a great fortune?" When Scott heard this, he replied subconsciously, "But the possibility of success in such a dangerous place is almost zero." Green laughed. "How would you know if you don't try?" Scott sighed. "I think those who entered the passage and couldn't come out were thinking the same thing as you. They all wanted to go in and try, but in the end they couldn't come back." Hearing this, Green nodded. "Scott, you're right, I think so too. Before everyone went in, they felt that they would succeed. But in the end, they all failed and stayed in this passage forever." Scott saw that Green also understood what he meant. For a moment, he couldn't think of any words to persuade him. Once again, the field became quiet. After a long while, Scott suddenly said, "I have an idea. Relatively speaking, it's a bit safer." Green heard this and turned to look at him. "What idea? Tell me." Scott said, "We can wait outside and wait for the Raymond family's experts to arrive. Then we can enter the passage with them. At that time, with their help, I think our chances of success will be a lot higher, and our danger will also be reduced a lot." Scott saw that Green was about to say something, so he hurriedly continued. "With the help of those experts, although our profits will be much lower, our safety will also be guaranteed. This can be considered a good idea." Hearing this, Green silently nodded and thought about Scott's idea. At this time, Keaton, who had been listening to the conversation, suddenly said, "This passage is too dangerous. Needless to say, there are other dangers, but we can't deal with these large-toothed rat. I feel that with the strength of our mercenary group, it will be really difficult to deal with them." Green thought for a long time, then slowly raised his head and said slowly, "In that case, let's wait for them to come. When the time comes, we will enter the passage together." Seeing that Green was finally willing to withdraw, Scott was immediately overjoyed. To be honest, he didn't want to enter this passage again no matter what. Even if there were huge benefits, he still didn't want to go. Although they would have to wait for those experts to come and enter again, with their help, the danger of entering the passage would definitely be reduced a lot. Since the matter had been decided, Green didn't delay any longer and directly ordered all the mercenaries to withdraw from the passage. Seeing that there were no more bats in the huge space, Mu Hongi led everyone and slowly walked into the big space. Walking into the big space, everyone began to split up to check the situation inside. There was nothing strange in the big space. There were 3 passages leading to unknown places on the opposite side, and one to the left and one to the right of the passage they came from. In the entire large space, there was nothing else other than these few passageways. After everyone checked to see if there were any new discoveries, they found a corner and sat down. At this moment, one of the guards suddenly pointed up and said loudly, "Look, there's another passage up there." Hearing this, everyone hurriedly looked in the direction that the guard was pointing. Sure enough, on the opposite side of the rock wall, there was really a dark passage high above the ground. Looking from afar, they could see a protruding rock wall at the bottom of the passage. If they stood in the big space and looked at it from another angle, they could only see the rock wall but not the passage. Looking at these passages in the big space, everyone hesitated for a moment. Which passage should they go to next? Hodaki walked to Mu Hongi's side and asked, "Big brother, which passage should we choose?" Mu Hongi shook his head. "This place is full of strangeness. I feel that if we choose the wrong passage, there might be a huge danger waiting for us after entering it." Shin Feisher looked around and said, "Big brother is right. I don't know where those big bats are hiding. If they appear, we won't be able to deal with them." Chapter 54. As Mu Hongi looked at the several tunnels in the large space, he pondered which tunnel he should enter. After thinking for a while, he looked at the 2 tunnels on both sides of the tunnel that he had entered from. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. Could these 2 tunnels also be entrances? If there were also 2 entrances, then where did these 2 entrances lead to? What kind of danger could there be in these 2 tunnels? After thinking for a while, Mu Hongi finally made up his mind. Let's take a look at the 2 tunnels that seemed to be exits first. Mu Hongi felt that the monsters in these 2 tunnels shouldn't be that strong. As for the 3 tunnels on the other side, the monsters in them should be much stronger than the monsters here. Thinking of this, Mu Hongi looked around at the people around him and slowly said, "Let's go. Let's take these 2 tunnels and see what's here." Everyone was hesitant as well. They didn't know which tunnel to choose. Seeing that their big brother had said so, no one objected. They all agreed. Seeing that no one objected, Mu Hongi immediately gave the order to set off. Everyone followed the left tunnel and walked into the dark tunnel once again. This time, Mu Hongi personally walked in front to check for any sudden attacks from monsters. After walking for a while, Mu Hongi felt that the road under his feet was slanting downward. He couldn't help but think to himself, could it be that this tunnel leads underground? Mu Hongi and the others had entered the tunnel from halfway up the mountain. Now that the tunnel was slanting downwards, Mu Hongi suspected that this tunnel led underground. Not long after Mu Hongi and the others left, the sound of wings flapping could be heard from the big space that they had just left. Countless bats flew out from the tunnel high up. Because there were so many of them, when they flew out from the tunnel, they gathered into a torrent. They were like a red ribbon that flew out continuously from the tunnel. Piak piak piak. Soon, these red bats landed on the walls and made that sound again. It didn't take long for the empty space to be filled with countless red bats again. Everyone didn't know how long they had been walking. Mu Hongi, who was walking in front, suddenly waved his hand, indicating for everyone to stop. Everyone, stop for a moment. There seems to be a sound in front. Hearing this, everyone stopped and listened carefully to the situation in front. Squeak, squeak. The voice was very weak, but everyone could still recognize it. Mu Hongyi frowned and turned to look at the crowd. He asked curiously, "What is this sound? Which one of you can tell?" Hearing this, everyone shook their heads, indicating that they had never heard of this voice. Mu Hongyi thought for a moment before continuing, "We've already come this far. Let's continue moving forward. Everyone must be careful on the road ahead." Everyone nodded in agreement. Mu Hongyi then turned around and took the lead to walk forward again. Creak, creak, as the group cautiously advanced, the voices in their ears grew louder and louder. Before long, one of Zhang Qiuming's guards suddenly whispered, "This voice sounds like a mouse." Hearing this, everyone hurriedly listened carefully to the source of the voice. After a long while, Hodaki nodded and said, "It does sound like a mouse?" Everyone also recognized this voice. After hearing Hodaki's confirmation, they were slightly relieved. They felt that they were just some rats. There was really nothing to be afraid of. Mu Hongyi turned around and saw everyone's relaxed faces. He couldn't help but remind them. Even if there are some rats ahead, everyone must still be careful. Who knows what kind of rats are ahead? Don't let your guard down. At this moment, Zhang Meng, who was in the crowd, suddenly picked up a stone from the ground and threw it into the tunnel. Piak, piak, piak. After the stone was thrown out, it hit the rock wall again. After a series of sounds, it flew into the depths of the dark tunnel. Following the sound of the stone hitting the rock wall, the strange sounds in the tunnel suddenly increased. Squeak, 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 squeak. After hearing this sound, everyone didn't pay too much attention. After all, everyone was a master. It wasn't too easy to deal with some small rat. Just as everyone was paying no attention, Zhang Meng suddenly said, "Those things seem to be coming this way." After Zhang Meng's words, everyone hurriedly held their breaths again and listened to the sounds in the tunnel. Squeak, squeak, indeed, everyone could hear that the sounds seemed to be much closer. Mu Hongyi was the first to draw out his bright ray sword. At the same time, he ordered everyone to prepare for battle. In this dangerous tunnel, no one dared to be careless. Even though they were facing some small rats, no one dared to let their guard down. Everyone was a master who had been through hundreds of battles. Naturally, they knew that no matter what, they couldn't let their guard down. Otherwise, if something went wrong, they would lose their lives. Just as everyone was preparing, the sounds got louder. Evidently, the distance between the two parties was getting closer. Squeak, squeak. After a while, the sounds in the tunnel got louder. At this moment, the relaxed expressions on everyone's faces disappeared completely. What replaced it was a look of suspicion and caution. Even if a normal rat were to make a sound, it wouldn't be that loud. But the sounds coming from the depths of the tunnel were much louder than a normal rat's. It was only at this moment that everyone remembered. Since bats could become so big, what reason did the rats have to not become so big? Squeak, squeak. As the sounds in the tunnel got louder, everyone's faces got uglier and uglier. The sounds coming from the depths of the tunnel were not only loud, but there were also many of them. Squeak, 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 squeak. These sounds were no longer as continuous as they were at the beginning. Instead, they were chaotic. It was as if there were countless rats squeaking at the same time. It was almost impossible to tell what the rats were squeaking about. All that was left was a series of squeaking noises. The two brothers, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong, looked at each other and nodded at the same time. Immediately, they raised the sabers in their hands and took a few steps forward. They passed by Mu Hongyi and came to the front. The tunnel wasn't wide. It could only allow two people to fight side by side. Any more and they would affect each other. Seeing the two brothers rushing forward, Mu Hongyi did not say anything. He just stared at the depths of the tunnel, waiting for the monsters to arrive. Squeak, squeak. the sounds coming from the tunnel got louder and louder. The sounds were chaotic, echoing in the dark tunnel. This continuous noise made everyone feel frustrated. They couldn't wait to rush up and kill all the monsters that were rushing over so that the tunnel would be peaceful again. Chapter 55. The sound from the depths of the darkness grew louder and louder. Everyone could already hear the rustling sound. Although they didn't know what the sound was, everyone could guess that it was the footsteps of the monsters that were rushing over. Soon, the sound got closer and closer. Even the creaking sound of the monsters' claws scratching the walls could be heard clearly. Everyone understood that these monsters were about to rush over. Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong were so nervous that their palms were sweating. When they heard that the monsters were about to rush over, they couldn't help but grab the hilt of their swords. At the same time, they raised the swords in their hands to the easiest place to attack. Only then did they stare at the dark tunnel. At this moment, Shen Feisher, who was standing in the crowd, was so scared that his face turned ashen. This wasn't to say that he was a coward. It was just that after seeing the tide of red bats, he already had a certain fear of these creatures in his heart. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if he was the only one here, he would definitely turn around and run without hesitation. Mu Hongyi turned his head and saw Shen Feisher's ashen face. He immediately felt a little unhappy. Could it be that some small rat scared you to this extent? Just as Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong were nervously looking at the tunnel in front of them, suddenly, a black shadow came out of the darkness and pounced at Zhang Yuntao like lightning. Facing the attack of the black shadow, Zhang Yuntao naturally didn't dare to be careless. He flipped the long sword in his hand slightly and the black shadow, as if walking into a trap, crashed into the long sword in his hand. Immediately, it let out a sizzling sound and hung on the long sword in Mu Hongyi's hand, motionless. It was also at this moment that everyone saw clearly what the monster that pounced over looked like. It was really no different from what everyone had guessed. It was a rat. The only difference was that this rat was much bigger than a normal rat. It was at least 10 times bigger. Everyone carefully looked at the huge rat hanging on Zhang Yuntao's saber and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Not only was this rat big, it also looked very fierce. Its 4 sharp claws had been rubbed against the rocks all year round. They had long been sharpened and emitted a dark light. The scariest thing was that there were 4 long fangs in front of the rat's mouth. These 4 fangs shone with a cold light under the dim red light. No one dared to doubt the damage it could cause. Creak, creak. The rats that Mu Hongyi and the others encountered were the same rats that the fierce wind mercenary group had encountered. While Mu Hongyi and the others were still in a daze, a few more large-toothed rats rushed up. Zhang Yuntao did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly swung the tip of his saber and flung the hanging large-toothed rat to the side. Then, he pointed the saber forward and stabbed a large-toothed rat that was charging over. A large group of large-toothed rats had already rushed up. Although Zhang Yuntao had killed 1 large-toothed rat, a few more large-toothed rats were rushing up from the cliff. Seeing this, Zhang Yuntao's expression changed. He did not bother to get rid of the giant-toothed rat hanging on his saber. Instead, he hurriedly brandished his saber and slashed at the few giant-toothed rats that were charging at him from the rock wall. Although the few large-toothed rats that were rushing over from the cliff wall were very fast, the saber in Zhang Yuntao's hand was definitely not to be trifled with. A cold light flashed in front of him, and 3 large-toothed rats that had rushed over from the rock wall were swept away by him and fell to the ground. Although Zhang Yuntao had blocked these 3 giant-toothed rats, there were more and more giant-toothed rats rushing over. Just as Zhang Yuntao withdrew his saber, more than a dozen giant-toothed rats rushed over from the ground and the rock wall. Zhang Yuntao did not dare to hold back anymore. He immediately waved the saber in his hand and swept it in front of him. The saber flashed past, and suddenly, there was a burst of screams in front of Zhang Yuntao. The next moment, More than a dozen giant-toothed rats that had rushed over in front of him were swept away by Zhang Yuntao. At that time, when the fierce wind mercenary group was dealing with these giant-toothed rats, it was not as easy as Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji. Of course, this did not mean that Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji's martial arts were better than theirs. It was because Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji both used short sabers. In this narrow passage, their sabers could be extended freely. Lowell was fighting very hard at that time. On the other hand, Field, who was beside him, seemed to be slightly more relaxed. This did not mean that Field was better than Lowell. It was just that the mace in Lowell's hand was too long. In this passage it could not be extended. Zhang Yuntao killed more than a dozen giant-toothed rats in a short period of time. Lan Ji, who was beside him, killed more giant-toothed rats than he did. Although the two of them slashed wildly, there were too many giant-toothed rats. It was as if there was no end to them. As soon as Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji cleared the area in front of them, more giant-toothed rats immediately rushed over. Seeing that there were more and more giant-toothed rats in front of them, Ho Daki suddenly took out a white arrow from behind his back and knocked it on the bowstring. Then, he slowly began to draw the bow. Just as Ho Daki was drawing the bow, a breeze began to gather around him. After a while, he suddenly shouted, "Zhang Yuntao, get down!" The few of them had been together for many years and had cooperated with each other many times in battle. At this moment, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji, who were in front of them, heard Ho Daki's shout and immediately understood. They began to exert their strength at the same time and swung their swords with all their might. They swept away all the giant-toothed rats in front of them and immediately got down on the ground. Not long after the two of them got down, Ho Daki shouted again, "Wave arrow!" As soon as Ho Daki finished speaking, his fingers loosened and the white arrow on the bowstring rolled up a gust of wind and flew into the dark passage. Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji only felt a gust of wind blow over their heads. In the next moment, they heard the screams of the giant-toothed rats in front of them. The white arrow contained the true power that Ho Daki poured into it. It rolled up a gust of wind and flew towards the large group of giant-toothed rats that were rushing over. When the white arrow flew over, all the giant-toothed rats within a 1-meter radius of the arrow were blown into pieces by the gust of wind. After the white arrow flew over and cleared out a large group of giant-toothed rats, it crashed into the rock wall and fell to the ground. At this moment, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji stood up and once again waved the swords in their hands and slashed at the remaining giant-toothed rats. Although Ho Daki's move was powerful, it had a small range. Only the giant-toothed rats within a 1-meter radius of the white arrow were affected. The giant-toothed rats outside of this range were not affected at all and continued to rush towards Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji. Although there were still many giant-toothed rats rushing over, compared to before, there were much fewer of them. Chapter 56. After Ho Daki's wave arrow flew past, it also bought a moment for Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong to catch their breath. However, it was really only a moment. Soon, a large number of large-toothed rats rushed out of the darkness again, squeaking and rushing towards Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong, who were in front of them. Faced with a large number of large-toothed rats rushing over, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong were once again in danger. Mu Hongyi saw that the situation in front was critical and could not help but frown. He lowered his head and thought for a moment before turning back and saying, "There are too many large-toothed rats in front. Let's all take turns to use our skills to attack those large-toothed rats." Hearing this, everyone nodded their heads one after another. The situation was critical now. If they did not think of a way, they were afraid that everyone would be trapped here. Everyone rubbed their fists and began to prepare to use their best skills. Seeing that everyone was almost ready, Mu Hongyi asked in a low voice, "Who will go first?" As soon as Mu Hongyi's voice fell, Fan Shouwu took the initiative to walk in front of him and said, "My martial arts skills are low. Let me throw a brick to attract the jade first. Hearing this, Mu Hongyi nodded. It did not matter who went first. Anyway, there seemed to be an endless number of large-toothed rats rushing over. Everyone would have a chance to use their best skills. Seeing that Fan Shouwu was ready, Mu Hongyi immediately shouted to Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong in front of him. Zhang Yuntao, Lan Zhiyong, the two of you listen carefully. When we attack later, quickly get down. Hearing this, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong quickly responded. At the same time, they were overjoyed. If their big brother did not think of a way, they were afraid that they would not be able to hold on for long. There were too many large-toothed rats in front of them. Even if the two brothers were strong in martial arts, they had already been bitten several times by these little things. If this continued, the two brothers might die here. Seeing that Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong were ready, Mu Hongyi said to Fan Shouwu, "Let's begin." Fan Shouwu nodded and immediately drew out his cold light sword. At the same time, he began to silently use his internal breath. When his internal strength was raised to the maximum, he suddenly shouted at Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong in front of him, "Get down." Zhang Yuntao had been waiting for this moment for a long time. After listening to Fan Shouwu's words, they immediately lay down on the ground without hesitation. Seeing this, Fan Shouwu immediately took 2 steps forward, arriving in front of the two, and shouted, "Stars!" As soon as Fan Shouwu finished speaking, a ball of starlight rose from the cold light sword in his hand. In the blink of an eye, it transformed into a dozen dazzling cold stars in front of him. A moment later, a few cold stars flew into the distant darkness and landed on the charging pack of large-toothed rats. Creak, 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 following Fan Shouwu's chilling stars, a large number of large-toothed rats began to cry out in pain. Very quickly, a large number of them were cleared out. Although Fan Shouwu's move was quite powerful, his strength was still too low. In the blink of an eye, his ultimate move, Vast Stars, had disappeared in front of him. When Fan Shouwu saw that his ultimate move had disappeared, he hurriedly retreated a few steps and dodged to the side. Wave Arrow. Just as Fan Shouwu retreated to the side of the cliff, Ho-Daki's wave arrow flew out from the bowstring, bringing with it a strong gust of wind as it rushed towards a large number of large-toothed rats. Next, Shin Feisher, Heart-Destroying Fist. Zhang Qiuming, Long Rainbow. Mu Hongyi, Flowing Light. Everyone took turns to use their ultimate moves. At this moment, Zhang Meng realized that none of these people were mediocre. Everyone had their own ultimate moves, and each of their ultimate moves were quite extraordinary. This was an eye-opener for him. Although everyone's ultimate moves were very powerful, there were simply too many of these large-toothed rats. It was almost as if there was no end to them. It was only until everyone's inner energy was depleted that the number of large-toothed rats gradually decreased. At this moment, the tunnel in front of them was almost completely filled with large-toothed rats. If it weren't for their super-powerful ultimate moves, this tunnel would have been completely blocked by these large-toothed rats. When Mu Hongyi saw that the number of large-toothed rats was decreasing, he was slightly relieved. He knew that the crisis had passed and hurriedly waved his hand, indicating for everyone to stop. After everyone received the order and saw that there weren't many large-toothed rats rushing towards them, they all let out a long sigh of relief and collapsed on the ground. Just now, everyone took turns to use their ultimate moves. After a long period of using them, their inner energy had long been depleted. If those large-toothed rats hadn't been eliminated, they were afraid that their side would be in danger next. Zhang Meng walked towards the pale-faced Fan Shouwu and sat down in front of him, asking with a smile, "How are you? Are you all right?" At this moment, although Fan Shouwu's face was pale, his expression was filled with joy. With his martial arts, he was actually able to fight side by side with an expert like Mu Hongyi. This was something that he didn't even dare to think about in the past. The fierce brothers, Lord Mu and the others are really powerful. Today, I'm lucky enough to see them use their ultimate moves. It's really admirable. Zhang Meng nodded. Their martial arts are indeed very powerful. However, your martial arts aren't bad either. When Fan Shouwu heard this, he said somewhat embarrassedly, my martial arts are simply too weak compared to theirs. Just as everyone was talking, Zhang Yuntao, who had been fighting at the front, suddenly shouted loudly. Big brother, there are no more rats rushing towards us. Mu Hongyi nodded and shouted at Zhang Yuntao, since there are no more rats, the two of you should take turns to rest. Don't let your guard down. In this battle, although Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong were at the front, the two of them didn't use much energy. After the two of them fought for a while, Mu Hongyi ordered everyone to take turns to use their ultimate moves to attack the large-toothed rats that were rushing towards them. Ever since Fan Shouwu made his move, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong had been lying on the ground without moving. This was because they couldn't move. Everyone was constantly using their ultimate moves to attack the large-toothed rats above them. If they dared to stand up, they would definitely end up like the large-toothed rat. Later on, when Mu Hongyi saw that there weren't many large-toothed rats rushing towards them, he let the two of them clean up the mess. Ho Daki looked at the passageway that had returned to normal. After thinking for a while, he turned to look at Mu Hongyi and asked, Big brother, are we still going forward? After listening to Ho Daki's question, Mu Hongyi didn't hesitate this time and nodded directly. We can only continue forward. I'm guessing that this is the passageway that leads to the outside. If we don't open up this passageway, it would be terrible if there's danger inside. Chapter 57. Mu Hongyi was right. If they did not open up the exit and continued to go deeper, they would not have a chance to escape with the large-toothed rats blocking their way even if they wanted to. Ho Daki nodded when he heard this. I didn't expect that there would be such a place besides the Nightmare Eagle. Mu Hongyi was silent for a while before he spoke slowly. Our current location shouldn't be too far from the entrance. Logically speaking, the further in we go, the more dangerous it will be. However, we almost couldn't deal with these monsters at the entrance. If we continue to go deeper, I'm afraid that there will be more powerful monsters. Ho Daki thought for a while and said, Brother, you should be right. Big brother, what you said should be right. There must be even more powerful monsters inside. Ho Daki hesitated for a while before he continued, I'm thinking, what if we don't go in? Mu Hongyi was stunned when he heard this. Then, he smiled and said, Aren't you curious about the things inside? Ho Daki shook his head. This is not a question of curiosity. We almost couldn't deal with the monsters here. If a large number of more powerful monsters appear, we will definitely be injured. Mu Hongyi nodded when he heard this. Ho Daki was right. If more powerful monsters appeared, they would definitely be injured. However, should they just retreat like this? Mu Hongyi was not willing to do so. Great benefits were often hidden in great danger. Mu Hongyi was very clear about this. Although Mu Hongyi was a Xiantian master, he felt that he had not made much progress after entering the Xiantian realm and after so many years of cultivation. However, Mu Hongyi was also very clear that it was quite difficult to improve again after entering the Xiantian realm. He was not the only one who felt this feeling of slow progress. All Xiantian masters felt this. If they wanted to break through again, they had to think of a way. Mu Hongyi had once heard people say that the reason why many experts were able to break through was because of some treasures. Mu Hongyi was just a guard captain. It was not easy for him to obtain high-level treasures. Then, was there any treasure in this passage that could help him break through? This was the question that Mu Hongyi had been thinking about. Ho Daki saw that his brother did not speak, so he hurriedly asked again, Big brother, do you really want to go inside? Mu Hongyi was silent for a long time before he slowly nodded and said seriously, I do want to take a look inside and see what's inside. Ho Daki was a little anxious when he heard that and hurriedly stopped him. Big brother, you mustn't do that. We don't even know what dangers lie ahead. Furthermore, we have the son of the deputy prefectural governor in our group. If anything happens to Fangongzi, we won't be able to bear the consequences. Big brother, you have to reconsider. Mu Hongyi shook his head. The reason why I want to leave through this passage is because I want to send all of you out and then enter this place alone. When Ho Daki heard this, he became even more anxious. Big brother, how can you do this? It's impossible for you to pass through this passage by yourself. Mu Hongyi looked into the depths of the passage and sighed. I also know that it may be very dangerous inside, but if I don't try, how can I know what's inside? Ho Daki also sighed. Big brother, even if it were those rats that we encountered just now, it would be difficult for you to deal with them alone. If there are more dangerous monsters, you won't have a chance to escape. Big brother, no matter what, you have to think carefully. Mu Hongyi looked at Ho Daki and patted him on the shoulder with a smile. Second brother, you don't have to worry about me. If I really encounter a powerful monster inside, I think that with my martial arts, even if I can't defeat it, I should be able to escape without a problem. When Ho Daki heard this, he wanted to persuade him again but was stopped by Mu Hongyi. Second brother, I've made up my mind. You don't have to persuade me anymore. I know your good intentions. Although the conversation between Mu Hongyi and Ho Daki was not loud, Zhang Meng still heard it clearly. Zhang Meng thought for a moment and turned to look at Fan Shou. He asked with a smile, Fan Gongzi, if you had a choice, would you choose to continue searching for treasures inside? When Fan Shou heard this, he shook his head. It's too dangerous here. The rats we encountered and the bats over there should be the lowest level monsters according to their distribution. However, even these lowest level monsters are quite difficult for me to deal with. If we continue to go in, I'm afraid it will be even more dangerous. I think I still have some self-awareness. When Zhang Meng heard this, he reached out and patted Fan Shou on the shoulder. You're smart. You know it's dangerous, so you don't go. At this point, Zhang Meng lowered his voice and asked, Guess if there's anyone here who isn't afraid of the danger and wants to continue going in. Fan Shou thought for a moment and then shook his head. I don't think so. When we were dealing with those rats just now, you saw that everyone used almost all their strength to eliminate those rats. If we encounter more powerful monsters, we will definitely be wiped out. Zhang Meng smiled and shook his head. You're wrong. There must be someone who isn't afraid of the danger and wants to go in and take a look. When Fan Shou heard this, he shook his head. I don't believe it. It's so dangerous here. If we're not careful, we might lose our lives. Who would be so stupid to want to go in and search for treasures? When Zhang Meng heard this, he laughed in his heart. Fan Shou had guessed wrong. At least, Mu Hongyi wanted to go in and take a look. Of course, this included Zhang Meng. Zhang Meng wasn't afraid of any danger here. What he wanted to do the most was to find an experienced person to enter this passage with him and explore inside. Why did he want to find an experienced person? Of course, there was a reason for that. If Zhang Meng entered the passage by himself and beat up the monsters he saw, he was afraid that all the monsters here would be beaten to a pulp by him. However, why did Zhang Meng want to enter this passage? The main reason was to get some gold coins to spend. After all, there were so many people in the village. If there wasn't a large amount of gold coins, the people in the village wouldn't be able to live a good life. The problem was that Zhang Meng didn't know what was valuable. This was very awkward. If Zhang Meng randomly beat all the monsters into a pulp, then all he would gain would be a large pile of meat paste. There wouldn't be anything valuable. Chapter 58. Everyone rested for a while. When Mu Hongyi saw that everyone's strength had recovered, he immediately ordered them to continue moving forward. Along the way, it was still Zhang Yuntao and his brother who led the way. Everyone followed closely behind and moved forward cautiously. Although most of the large-toothed rats had been eliminated, there were still sporadic large-toothed rats that rushed out from the darkness and ambushed everyone. But without exception, they were all killed by Zhang Yuntao and his brother, who were leading the way. Everyone was moving forward and exploring when suddenly, Zhang Yuntao, who was leading the way, suddenly shouted, "Big brother, there seems to be a big space in front." Mu Hongyi heard and immediately ordered them to stop moving forward. Then, he let Zhang Yuntao go forward alone to check out the situation. Zhang Yuntao responded and walked forward with the steel saber in his hand. Zhang Yuntao walked very carefully, afraid that he would attract some monsters to rush over. Not long after, Zhang Yuntao walked to the big space that he had seen earlier. In the dark tunnel, the reason why Zhang Yuntao could see the large space was that there was more red in the large space. Therefore, he could see more clearly in the dark. He could see a large area of faint red from afar. Zhang Yuntao looked at the big space not far away and stopped to listen carefully. Then, he couldn't help but frown. Looking at the big space from where he was, although he didn't see any danger, he could hear a familiar sound. Squeak squeak. Although there weren't many of these sounds, Zhang Yuntao couldn't guarantee that there weren't many large-toothed rats in this big space. Zhang Yuntao took a deep breath and held his breath. He slowed down his footsteps and walked towards the tunnel of the big space. Along the way, Zhang Yuntao's footsteps were very light and didn't cause too much of a disturbance. Even the familiar sounds from the big space didn't change much. Zhang Yuntao was slightly relieved when he felt that he didn't disturb the monsters in the big space. When he reached the tunnel of the big space, he stopped again and slowly exhaled. Then, he took another slow breath and held the steel sword in his hand tightly. He looked into the big space. This large space was similar to the large space filled with bats. However, there weren't many monsters in this space. Zhang Yuntao only saw a small number of megalodon rats on the ground grinding their teeth. Zhang Yuntao carefully observed the space and found that there were 2 passages on the opposite side. His heart couldn't help but tremble. Could it be that one of the passages leads to the outside? After observing for a while, Zhang Yuntao slowly retracted his head and turned around to return the way he came. After listening to Zhang Yuntao's explanation, Mu Hongyi pondered in his heart. It seems that the big space was where these big rats lived. He had just eliminated all the big rats, so there weren't many of them left in this space. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi turned to look at the crowd and said in a low voice, "Ahead should be the gathering place of the big rats. However, we have already eliminated most of the big rat. There should only be a small number of rats left. Wait a moment, brothers, let's work harder and try to eliminate all the remaining big rat." After a while, Mu Hongyi saw that everyone understood what he meant, so he immediately waved his hand and said in a low voice, "Brothers, let's set off now to eliminate those big rats." When the crowd heard this, they all stood up, took out their weapons and followed behind Mu Hongyi. Soon, Mu Hongyi led everyone to the passage of the large space. He first waved his hand to signal everyone to stop. Then, he personally went forward to observe the large space. Seeing that the situation in the large space was no different from what Zhang Yuntao had said, he turned around and said to everyone in a low voice, "There aren't many big rats left in there. Everyone, get ready. We will rush in now and try to eliminate all of them." Hearing this, everyone nodded. Mu Hongyi turned his head to look at everyone again. He looked at the large space again and saw that there were no changes. Then, he shouted, "Brothers, let's rush in and eliminate these hateful big rats." As he spoke, Mu Hongyi took the lead and rushed into the large space. Seeing this, everyone didn't dare to be negligent. They all picked up their weapons and rushed into the large space. Even though these large-toothed rats had grown bigger, they were still vigilant. Mu Hongyi's shout was heard by all of the large-toothed rats. Seeing that an outsider had intruded into their territory, the large-toothed rats were enraged. They stood up quickly and rushed in the direction of the voice. At this moment, the large space, which was initially quiet, suddenly became noisy. Squeak, 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 countless large-toothed rats ran out from all directions. Originally, there weren't many large-toothed rats on the ground. But after Mu Hongyi's shout, countless shadows of large-toothed rats appeared from the ground. They squeaked and rushed in this direction. Looking at the large group of large-toothed rats rushing over, Mu Hongyi regretted it. He was a little careless. Initially, he saw that there weren't many large-toothed rats left on the ground in the large space. That was why he wanted his brothers to rush into the large space and wipe out the remaining large-toothed rats. This would save them a lot of time. But he didn't expect that there would be so many large-toothed rats. Mu Hongyi looked at them for a long time, but he still couldn't figure out where these large-toothed rats came from. But now that things had come to this, regret wouldn't solve the problem. Looking at the large group of large-toothed rats rushing towards him, Mu Hongyi immediately waved the bright ray sword in his hand and shouted, "Flowing light." Facing such a large number of large-toothed rats, Mu Hongyi knew clearly that normal sword skills wouldn't be able to solve the problem. Now, he could only rely on his ultimate move to deal with these despicable large-toothed rats. Just as Mu Hongyi's voice fell, the bright ray sword in his hand turned into a bright sword light. Like a waterfall flowing down from a mountain, it landed on the ground and created thousands of ripples. After the ripples spread out, it landed on the group of large-toothed rats that were rushing over. The large-toothed rats that were hit by the ripples were immediately smashed into pieces. Countless large-toothed rats cried out at the same time. In the blink of an eye, the large-toothed rats in front of Mu Hongyi were all cleared. What was left were only fragments of the large-toothed rat. Zhang Meng didn't participate in the battle. He felt that although there were many large-toothed rats here, Mu Hongyi and the others were definitely not to be trifled with. Each of them had strong martial arts skills. Dealing with these large-toothed rats shouldn't be a problem. Chapter 59. Mu Hongyi used his ultimate move and instantly wiped out all the large-toothed rats within 5 meters in front of him. Everyone saw that their boss had already used his ultimate move and did not dare to be negligent. They hurriedly stood in a position where they would not affect the others and began to use their ultimate moves on the large-toothed rats that were rushing over. For a moment, the big space was filled with flashes of brilliance, and the screams of the large-toothed rats could be heard everywhere. Although everyone's martial arts were powerful, there were too many large-toothed rats. Mu Hongyi had just used his ultimate move to wipe out all the large-toothed rats in front of him. Just as he was about to catch his breath, he suddenly saw a large number of large-toothed rats rushing over. Helpless, Mu Hongyi could only wave the bright ray sword in his hand again and roar, "Flowing light." Mu Hongyi continuously used his ultimate move to attack the large-toothed rats that were rushing over. The rest of his brothers were no exception. They were all continuously using their ultimate move. In the face of such a large number of large-toothed rats, ordinary sword techniques could no longer block the attacks of these large-toothed rats. Now, they could only continuously use their ultimate moves to prevent these large-toothed rats from attacking them. Mu Hongyi used his ultimate move 3 times in a row. When he saw that the number of large-toothed rats rushing over in front of him had not decreased, he felt even more regretful. If he had known this would happen, he would not have rushed in so rashly. Actually, Mu Hongyi could not be blamed for underestimating the enemy. They had already eliminated countless large-toothed rats in the passageway and thought that there were not many large-toothed rats left. Who would have thought that there were still so many large-toothed rats here? Mu Hongyi was holding a sharp sword, and attacking these large-toothed rats that were rushing over was still manageable. Among this group of people, the ones who were fighting the hardest were Ho Daki and Shin Feisher. Ho Daki was a long-range attacker. In terms of long-range attacks, he could be said to be the well-deserved king among these people. However, in the face of such a large number of large-toothed rats, it was really difficult for him to fight. His ultimate move, the oscillating arrow, was also a powerful long-range attack. However, it could not hit the large-toothed rats that were close to him. In desperation, he could only dodge while desperately using the longbow in his hand to smash the large-toothed rats on the ground. However, the longbow was not used like this. Its purpose was to attack the enemy from a distance. It was not very powerful to smash it like a hammer. Most importantly, it was not that sturdy. Although the longbow in Hodaki's hand was made by him at a high price, it still couldn't be compared to the hammer. As soon as Hodaki activated his ultimate skill, he was shocked to find that many of the rats had already broken through the seal of his ultimate skill and were charging toward him. In desperation, Hodaki could only circulate his internal energy and wave the longbow in his hand, sweeping it in front of him. With Hodaki's inner energy, even if he was holding a wooden stick, as long as he channeled enough inner energy, he could still wipe out all the large-toothed rats in front of him. Hodaki waved the longbow in his hand and swept it in front of him. Countless megalodon rats were sent flying by the longbow in his hand. They screamed and fell to the ground, motionless. Although Hodaki's attack was ferocious, more and more large-toothed rats rushed over as soon as he wiped out the large-toothed rats in front of him. Left with no choice, Hodaki could only circulate his inner energy and wave the longbow in his hand with all his might, sending the large-toothed rats flying one by one. Relying on his profound inner energy, Hodaki could hold on for a long time, but the longbow in his hand couldn't hold on for that long. Hodaki didn't fight for long like this before he suddenly heard the sound of a bowstring breaking. He cursed in his heart and hurriedly put away the longbow to check it. With just one look, Hodaki was about to fly into a rage. The quality of a longbow all depended on the bowstring. The bowstring that he spent a lot of money to buy was actually broken. Hodaki was so angry that he screamed. Since the bowstring was already broken, there was no need for him to stay back. He gathered all his inner energy and used the longbow in his hand as an iron rod, desperately attacking the large-toothed rats that were charging toward him. However, without the support of his ultimate skill, it was still quite difficult to rely on this kind of attack to block the large-toothed rats. Not long after, Hodaki was bitten a few times by the large-toothed rats that were charging toward him. He was in so much pain that he screamed, but he didn't dare to stop. He could only wave the longbow even harder to block the large-toothed rats that were charging toward him. Although Hodaki was fighting very miserably, he was still not the most miserable person. In this battle, the most miserable person should be Shinfeisure. Shinfeisure was a close combat fighter. Logically speaking, he should be the best at dealing with these large-toothed rats that were charging toward him. However, in reality, this was not the case. Green of the Fierce Wind Mercenary Group once said that the most terrifying thing about these large-toothed rats was their eating speed. As long as these large-toothed rats rushed toward you, they would immediately eat your body as fast as lightning. Even if you immediately beat them into minced meat, they would still eat a lot of your things. Shinfeisure didn't realize this at first and was still full of confidence. However, not long after, he felt that something was wrong. Shinfeisure had just launched his ultimate skill, the heart-destroying fist, when he immediately realized that a few large-toothed rats had broken through his defense and were charging toward him. Seeing these large-toothed rats charging toward him, Shinfeisure didn't care at all. He immediately crossed his fists and struck out at the same time, hitting two of the large-toothed rats' heads and sending them flying. There were not only two large-toothed rats charging toward Shinfeisure, there were a total of 5 of them. After Shinfeisure sent 2 large-toothed rats flying, he immediately waved his fists and hit the other 2 large-toothed rats, sending them flying. Although Shinfeisure had sent 4 large-toothed rats flying in a row, there was still one large-toothed rat that broke through Shinfeisure's fist wind and continued to charge toward him. Seeing this, Shinfeisure didn't care at all. He was a close combat fighter and naturally had a good understanding of close combat. After so many years of training, he could almost use every part of his body as a weapon. Seeing this large-toothed rat break through his defense and charge toward him, Shin Feisher sneered. He lowered his arm slightly and his elbow struck the large-toothed rat that was charging toward him. Shin Feisher's timing was very accurate. His elbow accurately hit the large-toothed rat's head, as if he had been waiting for this large-toothed rat to charge toward him. Squeak, ah! The large-toothed rat was hit in the head by Shin Feisher's elbow. It immediately screamed and fell to the ground. But at the same time, Shin Feisher also felt a piercing pain coming from his elbow. He immediately screamed in pain and hurriedly retracted his arm. He saw that a large chunk of his elbow had been bitten by the large-toothed rat. Seeing this, Shin Feisher was shocked and angry. He didn't think that these hateful large-toothed rats would turn around and bite him when he hit them. Chapter 60. After Shin Feisher sent the large-toothed rat flying, he was bitten by the large-toothed rat himself. He immediately screamed in pain. Although he was in great pain, the large-toothed rats did not care whether he was in pain or not. They still rushed toward him crazily, wanting to give him more food. Seeing this, Shin Feisher could only endure the pain and use his ultimate skill again to wipe out the large-toothed rats that were rushing toward him. However, there were too many large-toothed rats. Although his ultimate skill was very powerful, he still could not wipe out all the large-toothed rats that were rushing toward him. Looking at the large-toothed rats that had broken through his ultimate skill and rushed toward him, Shin Feisher felt a chill in his heart. He subconsciously wanted to block them with his fist, but the pain on his elbow made him retract his fist. Although he did not want to fight these large-toothed rats with his bare hands, these large-toothed rats refused to let him go and continued to rush toward him without regard for their lives. In desperation, Shin Feisher could only lift his leg and sweep it across, kicking away a few of the large-toothed rats that were rushing toward him. After kicking out, Shin Feisher did not feel any pain from his leg. He was overjoyed. He knew that his leg was covered by his clothes and those large-toothed rats could not bite him. Thinking of this, Shin Feisher immediately regained his confidence. Even if he did not use his fists and only relied on his feet, he was still not afraid of these large-toothed rats. After all, he was a melee fighter with rich combat experience. However, after a few rounds of fighting, Shin Feisher suddenly realized that his clothes had been bitten off by those abominable large-toothed rats. Seeing this situation, Shin Feisher was so angry that his eyes were about to burst, but there was nothing he could do. He could only grit his teeth and continue fighting. Mu Hongyi and his brothers unleashed their invincible might and exterminated many large-toothed rats. However, there were simply too many large-toothed rats. Although they exterminated many large-toothed rats, there were still many large-toothed rats that broke through their defensive line and bit them. Hearing his brother's continuous screams, Mu Hongyi was secretly anxious. He was so anxious that his mind was racing. He wanted to think of a way to change this situation. While Mu Hongyi was in a daze, a large-toothed rat had already broken through his defense line and bit him. Ah! Being bitten by a large-toothed rat was an absolutely terrifying thing. Mu Hongyi only felt pain on his body and subconsciously let out a scream. Although he quickly killed the rat, he still lost a lot of things. Compared to Mu Hongyi and his brothers, Fan Shouwu, Zhang Qiuming and the others were much better off. Mu Hongyi and his brothers blocked most of the large-toothed rats in front. Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming only needed to deal with a small number of large-toothed rats running from the side. This way they had to deal with fewer large-toothed rats. However, their martial arts were much weaker than Mu Hongyi and the others. Therefore, although they had to face fewer large-toothed rats, they were still flustered and in danger. Compared to Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming, Fan Shouwu's ultimate skill, Myriad Stars, could be considered an ultimate skill that could be used for both offense and defense. It could be used for both long-range and close-range attacks, so it could be used to deal with these large-toothed rats. However, Zhang Qiuming was a little weak. His ultimate skill, Long Rainbow, was to use the three-section spear in his hands to pierce out tens of meters, clearing out all the enemies in a straight line in front of him. It was quite powerful. However, against these tide-like large-toothed rats, clearing out all the enemies in a straight line in front of him was not enough. Although the battle had not been going on for long, Zhang Qiuming was already sweating profusely. Seeing that there were more and more large-toothed rats in front of him, Zhang Qiuming's eyes turned cold, and he immediately let out a shout. Long Rainbow! Following his words, the three-section spear in his hands turned into a long rainbow and pierced forward like a waterfall. Creak creak. The three-section spear pierced through tens of large-toothed rats in a row before stopping. Seeing that the three-section spear had lost its momentum, Zhang Qiuming hurriedly shook his hands and the three-section spear was quickly retracted. However, at this moment, tens of large-toothed rats had already rushed towards him from both sides. Seeing this, Zhang Qiuming was almost scared out of his wit. He hurriedly waved the three-section spear in his hands and swept it away, but it was too late with his speed. When Zhang Qiuming's three-section spear was halfway through sweeping, a few large-toothed rats had already rushed to his side. Zhang Qiuming knew that things were not going well, but there was nothing he could do. Just as he was about to wave his fist to block them, he saw a shadow flash by his side. Old Luo had already rushed up with his saber and blocked his side. The large-toothed rats themselves were not strong, but their terrifying part was their numbers. Like a tidal wave of large-toothed rats, no matter who they attacked, they would not be able to gain any advantage. Old Luo's steel saber slashed violently in front of him, and very soon, a few large-toothed rats had been eliminated. Zhang Qiuming saw that the danger on his side had been resolved, and only then did he feel slightly relieved. He could only say loudly, "Thank you very much." However, old Luo said with a serious expression, "Pay attention to the front." After Fan Shouwu used his ultimate skill, Stars, to sweep away all the large-toothed rats that were rushing towards him, he saw that there were more and more large-toothed rats rushing towards him from both sides. He thought for a moment and immediately shouted at Zhang Qiuming. "Everyone, gather around. Let's form a circle." When everyone heard this, they immediately understood and hurriedly retreated to Fan Shouwu's side. Everyone quickly stood side by side and formed the smallest circle. Of course, Mu Hongyi and the other four brothers were naturally not in this circle, as they were still fighting in front. This defensive circle was mainly formed by Zhang Qiuming, Fan Shouwu, and the guards that they had brought. There was a total of 8 people in the circle. After everyone formed this defensive circle, in addition to the fact that there were not many large-toothed rats rushing towards them from behind, for a moment they were evenly matched with the large-toothed rats that were rushing towards them. Fan Shouwu, Zhang Qiuming, and the others stabilized their formation and formed a defensive circle, which made them much safer. The large-toothed rats' attack mainly relied on their numbers. They rushed in from all directions, and while you could block the front, you could not block the sides. If this went on, the large-toothed rats would sooner or later find your weakness and rush over. Everyone formed a defensive circle and only needed to face the enemies in front of them. The large-toothed rats on the sides would naturally be dealt with by the people on the side. Zhang Meng hid at the entrance of the tunnel and carefully observed the situation in the large space. After looking for a while, he found out where the large-toothed rats came from. In this large space, other than the tunnel on the opposite side, there were 2 more tunnels on the side of the tunnel that Zhang Meng was standing on. These large numbers of large-toothed rats rushed out from these 2 tunnels. He did not know where they had been hiding before, but until now, Zhang Meng still saw many large-toothed rats rushing out from the tunnels. Chapter 61. Facing the endless large-toothed rats, Mu Hongyi was so regretful that his intestines turned green. Among these people, his martial arts were the highest. After entering this large space, although it had not been long, he had already used his ultimate skill 5 times in a row. Even if his inner strength was deep, he felt that he could not hold on any longer. Feeling that his inner strength was almost exhausted, Mu Hongyi could not help but look at the rest of his brothers. After seeing the situation of his brothers clearly, he was shocked. His 4 brothers were all pale and had injuries on their bodies. It seemed that they were all struggling to hold on. However, he was afraid that they would not be able to hold on for much longer. Mu Hongyi turned his head and saw the defensive circle formed by Fan Shouwu, Zhang Qiuming and the others. His heart moved and he suddenly shouted, "All of you, come over here. We will also form a defensive circle and fight side by side." Ho Daki and the others were already suffering from the battle. After hearing their big brothers shout, they immediately leaned over to him without hesitation. Although there were many large-toothed rats rushing over, under the full force of the 5 people, they still walked together and formed a defensive circle. However, there were only 4 of them fighting side by side on the periphery. Shin Feisher was already surrounded by the 4 people in the middle and could only catch his breath temporarily. Shin Feisher could not continue fighting. He was already injured all over. Whether it was his arms or legs, they were all bitten beyond recognition by the large-toothed rats. If he continued fighting, he was afraid that he would be bitten by these large-toothed rats until he became a skeleton. After Mu Hongyi and the others formed a defensive circle, the pressure on them decreased slightly. Even if they did not use their ultimate skills, they could still hold on for a while. Seeing that everyone was fighting so hard, Zhang Meng hesitated whether he should help them. If he did not help them, they would not be able to withstand the attacks of the large-toothed rats when they were exhausted. However, if he helped them, would it affect anything? After thinking for a while, Zhang Meng sighed helplessly. Since it was like this, he would help them. Thinking of this, Zhang Meng lightly punched the passage where the large-toothed rats were constantly pouring out. Just as Mu Hongyi was feeling a little desperate, he suddenly heard a loud noise. He looked over with the help of the dim red light and saw that the 2 passages in front of him had collapsed for no reason. The falling boulders had blocked the 2 passages. Seeing this situation, Mu Hongyi was immediately overjoyed. He knew that he was saved this time. After the battle just now, he had already seen that the reason why there were so many large-toothed rats in this large space was because a large number of large-toothed rats were constantly swarming out of the tunnel. Now that the 2 tunnels had collapsed for no reason, it meant that there were no more reinforcements coming from the large-toothed rat. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi suddenly became spirited. He once again unleashed a consummate skill. After wiping out all the large-toothed rats in front of him, he shouted loudly, "Brothers, as long as we eliminate all the megalodon rats in this space, we will win." In fact, even if Mu Hongyi did not shout this, everyone understood after hearing the loud noise. Although there were many large-toothed rats in front of them, they would eventually be killed off. As long as these hateful large-toothed rats did not have any reinforcements, everything would be fine. After the tunnels collapsed, everyone's spirits were lifted. Then, they began to cheer loudly. Although there were no more reinforcements from the large-toothed rats, there were still many of them. This battle went on for a long time before they were finally wiped out. Seeing that there were no longer any living large-toothed rats in the large space, everyone could not hold on any longer. They immediately found a slightly cleaner place and sat on the ground, panting heavily. Ho Daki rested for a moment, then immediately took out the rest of the medicine. He quickly walked in front of Shin Feisher and said anxiously, "Old 5, let me treat your wounds." Hearing this, Shin Feisher was stunned. He looked at Ho Daki in front of him, and felt a little uncomfortable. In this battle, everyone was injured, and Ho Daki was no exception. Although he had the bow with the broken string as a weapon, close combat was not his strength. Now, there were at least 5 or 6 wounds on his body. However, Hodaki did not treat his own wounds first. Instead, he treated his own wounds first. Shinfasher felt very uncomfortable. He looked at Hodaki, who was full of concern, and said in a low voice, "I'm fine. You should treat your own wounds first." Hodaki shook his head. "Old 5, don't say any more. My wounds are fine. Your wounds are the most serious. Let me treat them for you first." As he spoke, Hodaki had already begun to treat Shinfasher's wounds. Seeing Hodaki treating his own wounds, Shinfasher felt his eyes become moist. He suddenly understood. Brothers were brothers. There was no need for rankings. If everyone respected you, even if you were the lowest ranking, everyone would still respect you. If everyone did not respect you, even if you were the big brother, no one would truly respect you. Thinking of this, Shinfasher suddenly said, "Second brother, thank you." Hodaki, who was treating Shinfasher's wounds, heard this and said with a smile, "Old 5, we're all brothers. There's no need to be so polite." Hearing this, Shinfasher nodded heavily. "Second brother, I understand." After saying this, Shinfasher thought to himself, "Second brother, I really understand." After Hodaki finished treating Shinfasher's wounds, he took the medicine and went to Zhang Yuntao and his brother to treat their wounds. Finally, he went to Mu Hongi. "Big brother, let me treat your wounds too." Hearing this, Mu Hongi shook his head. "Second brother, it's okay. My wounds are not serious. Come, let me treat your wounds." Seeing that Mu Hongi's wounds were not serious, Hodaki nodded and handed over the medicine. Mu Hongi took the medicine and began to treat Hodaki's wounds. "Second brother, why do you think the 2 passages suddenly collapsed?" Hodaki looked at the passage in front of him that was tightly covered and shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe it was too old and so many big rats rushed over and knocked down the rock." When Mu Hongi heard this, he shook his head. "I don't think so. If the big mouse knocked down that rock, why did it knock down the rocks at the 2 entrances at the same time? This is a little puzzling." Hearing this, Hodaki was stunned and asked hesitantly, "Big brother, are you saying that someone helped us?" Mu Hongi shook his head. "I don't know. According to this situation, someone should have helped us. But, in this space, we don't see any outsiders." Chapter 62. After Mu Hongi finished treating Hodaki's wound, he walked towards the sealed passage. Before he reached the entrance of the passage, Mu Hongi heard a squeaking sound coming from the passage. Hearing these sounds, Mu Hongi's heart suddenly turned cold. Even if his martial arts were strong, after the battle just now, he did not dare to underestimate these weak large-toothed rats. Hodaki also walked over at this time. Hearing the sounds coming from the passage, he could not help but say, "Big brother, if these 2 boulders don't block the passage, I'm afraid we'll be in danger." Mu Hongi nodded silently. The sounds of the large-toothed rats coming from the passage were not only mournful, but there were also many of them. If these large-toothed rats really continued to rush into the space, then the consequences would be really unimaginable. Mu Hongi checked the situation of the 2 holes being covered, but he did not find any possibility of it being man-made. He could not help but feel even more puzzled. Could it be that it was really like what Hodaki said, that these rocks had collapsed naturally because it had been here for too long? Could there be such a coincidence? Hodaki walked behind Mu Hongi and looked at the passage sealed by the rocks. He could not help but say, "Big brother, it looks like it really wasn't man-made. It should have collapsed naturally." Mu Hongi nodded. Although he did not dare to believe that there could be such a coincidence in the world, the facts were right in front of him, and he had no choice but to believe it. "It looks like it's true," Hodaki said. "Big brother, our luck is really good. Such a coincidence actually happened at this critical moment. It's really a joyous occasion." The voices of the two men spread into the passage and caused countless large-toothed rats to squeak in the passage. Because there were too many squeaks, in the end they were buzzing like flies. Fan Shouwu, who was almost drenched in sweat, saw Zhang Meng walking over and said with a laugh, "The fierce brothers, this battle was really enjoyable. I've never experienced such an enjoyable battle since I was young." Zhang Meng smiled when he heard this. "Do you want to have such an enjoyable battle again?" Hearing this, Fan Shouwu shook his head with a bitter smile. "No, I really don't want to have this kind of battle again. It's too dangerous." At this point, Fan Shouwu pointed at the collapsed tunnel in the distance and lamented, "If those two tunnels hadn't suddenly collapsed, I feel like I wouldn't have been able to hold on." Zhang Qiuming, who was sitting beside him, also nodded helplessly. That is indeed the case. If the two tunnels had not collapsed and sealed off the large-toothed rats that rushed out, I'm afraid that we would not have been able to leave today. Fan Shouwu nodded. "It's too dangerous. To be honest, I don't have much internal energy left. If the two tunnels don't collapse soon, I'm afraid." Haha. Zhang Qiuming wiped the sweat off his face and turned to look at old Luo. He smiled and said, "I still have to thank you for just now. If it weren't for your help, those large-toothed rats would have eaten me up long ago." Old Luo shook his head. "If it weren't for Prince Zhang fighting at the front, with just the few of us, I'm afraid that we wouldn't have been able to stop so many large-toothed rats." While the few of them were joking around, Zhang Qiuming suddenly lowered his voice and said, "Guess what Captain Mu will do next?" Fan Shouwu shook his head. "I don't know. However, I think that Lord Mu will bring us out of such a dangerous place." Zhang Qiuming shook his head and said in a low voice, "I don't think so. I heard their conversation just now. It seems that Lord Mu said that no matter what, he has to go in and take a look to see what's inside." Fan Shouwu heard this and shook his head. "I don't think so. To be honest, we should be in the outer area now. Think about it. The monsters in the outer area of the tunnel are already so powerful. How powerful would the monsters be inside?" At this point, Fan Shouwu paused for a moment before he continued, "Although Sir Mu's martial arts is powerful, I feel that after seeing these large-toothed rats, I'm afraid that he has given up on the idea of going in again." Zhang Qiuming shook his head. "Who knows? However, I'm guessing that Lord Mu will still go in." Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming were discussing this matter. Mu Hongyi and Ho Daki were also discussing this issue. Ho Daki said, "Big brother, don't tell me you want to go in and take a look this time." Mu Hongyi heard this and looked at the large-toothed rats all over the ground. He was a little hesitant. If they went on, they might really be in danger. Not to mention other dangers, as long as the large-toothed rats in the tunnel were released, they would definitely not be able to get out alive. However, Mu Hongyi felt a little unwilling to give up this opportunity just like that. What should they do? Ho Daki looked at the hesitant Mu Hongyi and thought for a moment before speaking. "Big brother, if you really want to go in and take a look, we can only wait. Let's send someone back to report to the Grand Commander and ask him to send more people to support us. I think that after the Grand Commander knows about this, he will definitely ask the elders to come forward. At that time, with the help of the elders, we shouldn't be in too much danger. Big brother, I think this is the best choice. If you go into the tunnel yourself, I'm afraid that you will be in danger." Mu Hongyi was silent for a long time when he heard this. Then, he nodded slightly and said with a sigh, "Since things have come to this, we can only do this." Speaking of this, Mu Hongyi glanced at the sealed tunnel again and said slowly, "We should think of a way to get out now. When we get out of the tunnel, we will immediately send someone back to report to the commander and let him make a decision." Ho Daki was overjoyed when he heard this. "Big brother, since this is the case, let's quickly think of a way to get out." Mu Hongyi nodded and walked toward the crowd. Zhang Yuntao saw his big brother coming over and quickly stood up to welcome him. "Big brother, how is the tunnel? What exactly caused it to collapse? Mu Hongyi shook his head, then patted Zhang Yuntao's shoulder and said with a smile, "It seems that it was because we were lucky that the two tunnels collapsed at the critical moment." Zhang Yuntao nodded when he heard this. Although he didn't say anything, he didn't believe that the two tunnels collapsed at the critical moment because they were lucky. Even if they were lucky, it would be amazing if only one tunnel collapsed. How could both tunnels collapse? There must be a problem. However, since his big brother didn't want to talk about it, Zhang Yuntao naturally wouldn't talk about it. After thinking for a while, he asked, "Big brother, what should we do next? Should we continue to move forward, or find a way to get out?" Chapter 63. When Mu Hongyi heard this, he sighed and said slowly, "That's right. The monsters here are not something we can deal with. Now we can only retreat first, pass this news back and wait for the commander's decision." Zhang Yuntao nodded. This was also the best choice. If they continued to rush blindly, they might be completely wiped out. This was definitely not an alarmist talk. Just like in the battle just now, if the two passages had not been sealed, then the only outcome would have been a complete wipeout. Since they had decided to retreat, they had to think of a way to do so. Mu Hongyi glanced at the situation in the big space, and wanted to see which passage to take. The two passages behind them had been sealed by boulders. If they wanted to leave, they could only take the two passages opposite them. But where did those two passages lead to? No one knew. What would be in these two passages? No one knew either. After observing for a long time, he could not see which passage led to the outside world. Mu Hongyi hesitated again. He really just wanted to go out now. He just wanted to bring everyone out alive. If he wanted to go in and explore again, then that was his own business. Seeing his big brother hesitate, Zhang Yuntao suddenly spoke up. "Big brother, I think it's better if we give up the two passages in front and go back the way we came. What do you think?" Ho Daki heard this and also said, "Yes, big brother, we don't know what monsters are in the two passages in front. I think if we go back the way we came, although the journey will be a little longer, at least it will be safe." After listening to the words of his two brothers, Mu Hongyi pondered for a while before nodding. "Well then, let's go back the way we came." Since they had decided to go back the way they came, everyone did not delay any longer. They immediately stood up and walked back the way they came. The people in front of them were still the two brothers, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong. Everyone had already walked this path once. Relatively speaking, they were already very familiar with it. Moreover, there were no forks in this path. They just had to keep moving forward. Everyone had stayed in this dangerous place for long enough. They just wanted to get out as soon as possible. Naturally, their pace was much faster. Everyone moved forward. After losing the battle, they were not in the mood to talk. They just moved forward silently, wanting to get out of this dark passage as soon as possible. Although everyone could let their imaginations run wild, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong, who were walking at the front, did not dare to do so. The two of them were tasked with exploring the path. Naturally, they did not dare to be careless. Along the way, they held steel knives in their hands and carefully explored the path in front of them. They did not dare to have the slightest carelessness. Just when everyone was in a hurry, Zhang Yuntao suddenly stopped. At the same time, he waved his hand behind him, indicating for everyone to stop. When the crowd saw Zhang Yuntao wave his hand, they were all shocked. They hurriedly stopped in their tracks. Just as they were about to ask, they saw Zhang Yuntao in front of them make a shushing gesture. Everyone was even more shocked. They hurriedly listened to the voice in front of them. Piak, 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 piak. When everyone heard this familiar voice, they were shocked. Big bat. Judging from the source of the sound, there seemed to be a lot of big bats. When Mu Hongyi heard this voice, he was a little confused. There were no giant bats along the way, so why would there be such a sound now? Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi suddenly remembered what had happened in the large space with the large-toothed rats. Originally, there were not many large-toothed rats in the large space. However, when everyone rushed in, countless large-toothed rats came out of the passage. Could it be that the situation in the large space with the giant bats was the same? If that was really the case, it would be terrible. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi hurriedly walked forward to Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong and said in a low voice, "Come, follow me to the front to take a look." When Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong heard this, they nodded and followed Mu Hongyi forward. After walking for a while, the slapping sound became louder. Mu Hongyi's face was a little pale. He felt that what he had guessed just now might be true. The three of them walked carefully, not daring to make any sound. Even their breathing was suppressed as much as possible, for fear of alarming the giant bats in front of them. Hearing the slapping sound in front of them getting louder and more frequent, Mu Hongyi suddenly waved his hand at Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong behind him and pointed to the back. Then, he carefully walked back the way he came. When Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong saw that their big brother had retreated, they did not dare to delay and hurriedly followed Mu Hongyi's footstep. They walked all the way back and finally returned to their original position. When Ho Daki saw that Mu Hongyi had returned, he hurriedly went forward to greet him. Just as he was about to ask, he saw Mu Hongyi waving his hand vigorously at him and making a gesture to keep quiet. He could not help but feel a little strange, but he did not dare to ask again. Mu Hongyi walked in front of everyone, stretched out his arm and waved at everyone. Then, he took the lead and walked back the way he came. When everyone saw Mu Hongyi's cautious look, they knew that the situation was not good. At this time, no one dared to speak. Seeing that Mu Hongyi had retreated, they hurriedly followed behind him and walked back the way they came. Everyone walked quickly and soon returned to the large space with the large-toothed rat. At this time, the large-toothed rats inside were sealed and could not come out. Therefore, there were no large-toothed rats in the large space. Seeing this situation, Mu Hongyi was slightly relieved. He turned his head to look at everyone and said in a low voice, "We can't go back the way we came. Although I didn't walk into that space, I felt that there must be a lot of bats over there from the sounds made by those large bats. If we go from there, we might encounter the same danger as here. That's why I brought everyone back here. At least it's safer here. Let's discuss a plan here and then decide which way to go." When everyone heard this, they finally understood why Mu Hongyi had quietly brought them back. When Shen Feisher heard Mu Hongyi's words, he was shocked. Others did not know how powerful the bat space was, but he had seen it with his own eyes. The large bat swarm that covered the sky almost filled the large space. If those countless large bats rushed toward everyone, Shen Feisher could be sure that no one would be able to escape if this situation really happened. Although the large-toothed rats were terrifying, the large-toothed rats ran on the ground after all. Their attacks could still be traced. At least they would not leave the ground. However, the attacks of those large bats were different. These large bats could fly and they flew very fast. When they attacked the enemy, they would attack the enemy from all directions without any blind spots. Chapter 64. Mu Hongyi led everyone back to the space of the large-toothed rat. He looked at the two tunnels in front of him and began to ponder. Which tunnel should he choose? Now, he no longer had the idea of exploring. Mu Hongyi only wanted to find a safe tunnel and return to the outside as soon as possible. There were two tunnels on the opposite side. Mu Hongyi guessed that one of them should lead to the outside. As for the other tunnel, it was hard to say. It might lead to somewhere else. If they went the wrong way, they would definitely encounter monsters. If they encountered a tide of large-toothed rats, it would be terrible. Mu Hongyi did not believe that he would be so lucky as to escape the fangs of the large-toothed rats. Looking at the two tunnels on the opposite side, everyone was hesitant. After these few battles, Everyone was very clear that if they went the wrong way, they would definitely encounter a large number of monsters in the tunnel. When that time came, it would be hard to say if they could get out alive. If it was when they had just entered the tunnel, Mu Hongyi would definitely have the ability to make a decisive decision. However, after this battle, Mu Hongyi had become less decisive. He knew that his decision would directly determine everyone's life and death. If they chose the wrong tunnel in front of them, the chances of getting out alive were really too slim. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi strode to the front of the two tunnels and carefully observed the movements in the tunnels. He wanted to see if he could find any problems. However, unfortunately, the two tunnels were basically the same. It was almost impossible to find any problems from the outside. Mu Hongyi once again fell into hesitation. He was afraid that he would make a mistake in his command and cause everyone to fall into a desperate situation. Everyone was sizing up the two tunnels. After a long while, Hodaki suddenly said, "Big brother, since we have no choice, why don't you let me explore the path in front? After confirming that there is no danger in front, you all can enter the tunnel." Hearing this, Mu Hongyi thought for a while and nodded. "All right then, it's good that you go and take a look. How about this, I'll let Zhang Yuntao go with you. If there is any danger, you can take care of each other." Hearing this, Hodaki knew that now was not the time to be stubborn. He nodded. "All right, big brother, I'll go then." As he spoke, Hodaki had already taken the lead and walked into one of the tunnels. He did not deliberately choose it. He just randomly chose a tunnel and walked in. There was no need to choose. If he knew which passage was the safest, everyone would not hesitate. Zhang Yuntao did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly strode forward and chased after him. Hodaki held the broken bow and arrow in his hand and walked forward carefully. He did not dare to make too much noise. If there were any remaining large-toothed rats here, they would definitely swarm over after hearing his voice. Fortunately, Hodaki walked for a long time and did not find any megalodon rat. However, he found a new problem. Hodaki stopped and looked at the crossroads in front of him. He was a little puzzled. At this time, Zhang Yuntao also came forward and asked in a low voice, "Second brother, the situation here is not good." Hodaki nodded, but his gaze never left the crossroads in front of him. There were a total of 3 forks, and all of them were the same. Hodaki had already seen this clearly, and it was precisely because of this that Hodaki was a little hesitant. In the end, Hodaki decided to choose the middle tunnel. Because, according to the tunnel that they came from, only the middle tunnel could be connected to the tunnel that they came from. Thinking of this, Hodaki turned to look at Zhang Yuntao and said in a low voice, "We will walk in the middle. When we leave later, you must be very careful. I feel that this tunnel is a little different from the one that we were in just now." Zhang Yuntao nodded. "Second brother, don't worry." Hearing this, Hodaki raised the broken bow in his hand and walked towards the middle tunnel. The tunnel was very quiet. There was no sound at all. There were only a few droplets of water condensed due to the humidity. They dripped onto the rock surface and made a crisp sound. Looking at the dark tunnel in front of him, although Hodaki could not hear anything, he still felt a sense of danger surrounding him. Hodaki tried his best to open his eyes, wanting to see where this sense of danger came from. Unfortunately, he could not see anything. In front of him, there were only dark gray rocks. Other than rocks, there was nothing else. This invisible pressure was even more terrifying than a head-on battle. After walking for a short distance, Hodaki felt uncomfortably hot. He wiped the sweat on his forehead. It was also at this moment that he suddenly heard a weak sound. Goo goo. The sound was very soft, but in the silent tunnel, Hodaki could still hear it clearly. What is this sound? Hodaki was a little puzzled. This sound was definitely not made by the big rats or the big bat. Then what could it be? Although there was a sound in front of him, which proved that there was definitely a monster ahead, Hodaki was just a scout. If he only heard the sound and retreated, it would be a little too disgraceful. Hodaki took a deep breath, lightened his footsteps, and walked forward. After walking for a while, Hodaki felt that there were more sounds coming from inside. It was also at this moment that Hodaki suddenly realized that there were forks on both sides of the tunnel in front of him. When Hodaki saw the forks on both sides of the tunnel, he became even more nervous. He grabbed the bough with a broken string and carefully walked towards the fork in front of him. Just as Hodaki was about to enter the fork, he suddenly felt a gust of wind in front of him. The sound of the wind came so fast that it gave Hodaki a fright. He hurriedly used all his strength to stand up and lean back. It was at this moment that something that looked like a long whip shot out from where his body was originally standing. Very quickly, it retracted back into the dark fork. Seeing this change, more cold sweat flowed down Hodaki's forehead. He hurriedly took a few steps back and avoided the fork. At the same time, he raised the bough with a broken string in his hand and made a defensive posture. Zhang Yuntao saw that the situation was bad and hurriedly walked to Hodaki's side. He raised the saber in his hand in front of him and looked ahead vigilantly. The two of them were in a defensive posture, afraid that countless monsters would rush out from the darkness. However, the two of them waited for a long time, but no monsters rushed out from the darkness. Hodaki glanced at Zhang Yuntao and said in a low voice, "I'll go ahead and take a look. Wait for me here." Zhang Yuntao nodded. At the same time, he gripped the saber even harder. Although Zhang Yuntao was behind, his task was also very difficult. If Hodaki encountered danger in front, he would have to rely on him to save him. Chapter 65. Hodaki carefully walked towards the fork in the passage. He didn't dare to be careless. Who knew what kind of monster was hiding in the dark fork? Hodaki stared straight ahead, afraid that the monster would suddenly attack again. Just as Hodaki approached the fork in the road, another black shadow flew towards him like a bolt of lightning. Hodaki didn't know what was flying towards him, so he naturally didn't dare to take it head-on. He hurriedly retreated and dodged the attack. Hodaki saw that he had dodged the sneak attack in the dark. Just as he was about to move forward to check again, he suddenly heard a sizzling sound coming from his side. Hodaki was shocked and hurriedly turned his head to look. He was shocked to find that a ball of green mucus was sticking to the rock next to him. This ball of green mucus was constantly corroding the rock. The sizzling sound was the sound of the mucus corroding the rock. Seeing this scene, Hodaki was so shocked that his scalp went numb. He was secretly afraid. If he had been hit by this ball of mucus, Hodaki didn't believe that he would be stronger than the rock. After a short while, the corroded rock stopped making any noise. Only a large dent was left where the mucus had hit. Hodaki wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. He felt that his palms were cold. He subconsciously took a few steps back and returned to Zhang Yuntao's side. He lowered his voice and said, "Be careful. Be careful later. Don't get sprayed by that thing." Zhang Yuntao nodded. The rock that was sprayed by the mucus wasn't far from him. He naturally saw everything that happened just now. Seeing that the ball of mucus had such a strong corrosive power, Zhang Yuntao was so shocked that his heart turned cold. At this time, when he heard Hodaki mention it, he hurriedly nodded in response. "Second brother, I understand." After a while, Hodaki calmed down and walked forward again towards the fork in front of him. This time, Hodaki changed his tactics. He took out an arrow from behind him and held it in his hand. At the same time, he raised it above his head and looked like he was ready to shoot at any time. As he approached the fork, Hodaki became even more cautious. He moved his feet slowly, and as soon as he reached the front of the fork, he immediately let out a roar. Then, he quickly threw the arrow in his hand. After Hodaki threw the arrow in his hand, he immediately stomped on the ground and retreated like lightning. At the same time, a black shadow shot out from the darkness, streaking across the void and brushing past Hodaki's back. Hodaki had just dodged the attack when he heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the dark tunnel. Cuckoo, after hearing this scream, Hodaki was immediately overjoyed. He knew that the arrow he had just thrown must have hit the monster in the darkness. Otherwise, its scream would not have been so mournful. After hearing this scream, Hodaki hurriedly stopped. Just as he was about to turn around, an underground poisonous frog with arrows pierced through its body jumped out from the fork. As soon as the underground poison frog jumped out, it immediately opened its mouth, and its tongue flew out like lightning towards Hodaki. Zhang Yuntao saw that the situation was not good. He quickly stepped forward and waved the steel knife in his hand, chopping at the underground poison frog's tongue. Zhang Yuntao's martial arts skills were high and his strength was great. When the knife landed on the underground poison frog's tongue, it was immediately cut off. Cuckoo, with its tongue cut off, the underground poison frog let out another blood-curdling scream. It suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a mouthful of mucus. Then, it turned around and jumped hard, disappearing in front of the fork. At this time, Hodaki had already turned around. When he saw the underground poison frog spit out venom, he was almost scared out of his wits. He immediately exerted force on his feet and quickly retreated to the side. When Zhang Yuntao saw this ball of mucus, he naturally did not dare to be careless. He also quickly moved away and hid far away. As the two of them dodged with all their might, the underground poison frog's venom did not hurt anyone and flew far away. After dodging the attack of the ball of mucus, Hodaki hurriedly turned his head and looked in the direction of the underground poison frog. However, at the fork, the underground poison frog had already disappeared. Seeing that the underground poison frog had escaped, Hodaki and Zhang Yuntao looked at each other and secretly rejoiced that they had dodged quickly. Otherwise, if they were hit by that ball of mucus, they would definitely be dead. The two of them calmed down a little. Zhang Yuntao went forward and picked up the tongue that he had cut off. He looked at it and asked curiously, "Second brother, what do you think this is?" Hodaki looked at the half of the tongue in Zhang Yuntao's hand. Just as he was about to shake his head, he suddenly thought of something. "I know, this thing must be that monster's tongue. Only then would the monster cry out so miserably after you cut it off." Hearing this, Zhang Yuntao looked at it again and nodded. "Indeed, this really does look like a tongue. Although I have never seen such a big tongue, I could vaguely see that this thing was spat out from that thing's mouth." Hodaki thought for a while and said slowly, "Not only that, third brother, why does that monster look like a big frog?" Zhang Yuntao also nodded. "It does look like one. Not only does it look like one, but when it came out and when it escaped, it jumped instead of walking. I think only things like frogs would jump." Hodaki nodded and took out an arrow from behind him. He turned to Zhang Yuntao and said, "I'll go ahead and see if there are any more monsters there." Zhang Yuntao nodded and raised the steel sword in his hand. He was ready to go forward and support at any time. It was still the same old plan. As soon as Hodaki walked out of the fork, he immediately threw the arrow in his hand into the darkness and immediately retreated again. This time, there was no attack from the darkness, nor was there a scream. After waiting for a while, Hodaki was sure that the monster should have been injured and ran away. Hodaki walked towards the dark fork again. Although there was no sound from the fork, Hodaki still did not dare to be careless. The attack of the monster's tongue was secondary. The main thing was that the mucus it spat out was too powerful. As long as he was hit by that mucus, there was basically no hope for him. Hodaki carefully went forward to search. Zhang Yuntao did not dare to be negligent. He walked behind Hodaki, afraid that something unexpected would happen. Hodaki slowly walked to the opposite side of the fork and stabilized his body. There was nothing attacking him from the fork. After waiting for a while, Hodaki was completely relieved. The big monster really ran away. Chapter 66. Hodaki was slightly relieved when he saw that there were no more monsters in the fork. He turned to look at Zhang Yuntao behind him, and said in a low voice, "It seems that the monster ran away?" Zhang Yuntao nodded. "Second brother, are we going to continue?" Hodaki turned his head and looked at the tunnel in front of him. He thought for a moment and nodded. "We don't know what's in front of us. Why don't we go a little further and decide if we want to continue?" Zhang Yuntao nodded. "Okay, in that case, I'll take the lead this time." Hodaki shook his head. "Let me do it. We don't know what monsters are in front of us." Zhang Yuntao raised the sword in his hand and said with a smile, "Second brother, your weapon is not as good as mine. If there are monsters in front of us, my sword can at least cut off their tongues. I don't think your weapon will work. Let me scout ahead." Hodaki thought for a moment and agreed. His bow had a broken string. Even if he encountered monsters, he could only repel them and not cause any damage. Thinking of this, Hodaki nodded and said, "Okay, you scout ahead. But you have to be careful. The mucus that the monster spits out is too strong. Don't get hit by it." Zhang Yuntao nodded. "Second brother, I know. I'll be careful." While speaking, Zhang Yuntao gripped the steel sword in his hand and walked forward. Zhang Yuntao walked forward. Before long, he saw two more forks in the rock wall in front of him. He was shocked. The two forks in front of them were not on the same side of the rock wall, but on opposite sides of the rock wall. Although they were slightly separated, the two forks could still see each other. If there was only one fork, it would be fine. Even if there were monsters in the fork, they could only attack from one side. Now that the two forks were on both sides of the tunnel, it was very difficult to deal with. If he walked to the middle of the fork, he would be attacked from both sides. This was very difficult to deal with. He might even be hit by monsters from one side. Looking at the two forks, Zhang Yuntao's forehead was covered in cold sweat. How should he get through? However, since he was already here, he had to find a way to get past it. Thinking of this, Zhang Yuntao took a deep breath and clenched the steel saber in his hand. Then, he slowly walked forward toward the two passageways in front of him. At this moment, Hodaki, who had been walking behind, suddenly took a few steps forward and grabbed Zhang Yuntao's shoulder, stopping him from moving forward. Zhang Yuntao turned his head and saw that Hodaki was slowly taking off his coat. He suddenly understood Hodaki's idea and was overjoyed. He hurriedly gave Hodaki a thumbs up to express his admiration. Seeing this, Hodaki only smiled. Then, he took off his coat and hung it on the broken bough. After finishing these actions, Hodaki turned to look at Zhang Yuntao and gestured for him to get ready. Seeing this, Zhang Yuntao hurriedly nodded, indicating that he understood. Only then did Hodaki challenge his coat with the broken bowstring, and explore the path in front of the fork. Seeing the coat slowly approaching the fork, the two nervously held their breaths and stared at the two forks in front of them. Just as Hodaki picked up the coat in front of the fork, the two underground poison frogs hiding at the two forks immediately launched an attack. The underground poison frog hiding closer to the coat immediately opened its mouth and spat out a mouthful of venom. As for the underground poison frog further away, because of its distance, it only flicked out its tongue. Seeing that the two attacks from the left and right hit the coat, Hodaki did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly took out the arrow in his right hand and threw it towards the dark fork that spat out the venom. Goo goo! Immediately, a scream came from the dark fork. Hodaki was overjoyed. Just as he was about to go forward and end it, unexpectedly, the underground poison frog hiding in the fork suddenly jumped out. It opened its mouth and shot out its tongue, hitting Hodaki's body like lightning. Caught off guard, Hodaki was hit and immediately felt a burst of pain. It was so painful that he could not help but groan. His body was also hit back 2 steps before he could stabilize himself. But this was not the end. Just as Daki steadied himself, he felt that the big tongue that hit him was dragging him towards the big frog. Daki was shocked. If he was dragged over by the tongue and the big frog spat out another mouthful of venom, it would be too late. Thinking of this, Daki did not care much. He hurriedly grabbed the broken bough and smashed it towards the big tongue. But this was useless. Even if the broken bough could be used as an iron rod, it could not be used as a knife. Although he hit it hard, it only made the big frog scream. His body was still being dragged forward. Zhang Yuntao, who was originally looking at the other fork, saw that the situation was not good. He hurriedly backhanded his knife and cut off the big frog's tongue. After the big frog's tongue was cut off, Daki had just stabilized himself and immediately jumped to the side to dodge. Just as Daki's figure dodged, the big frog whose tongue was cut off had already spat out a mouthful of venom. It brushed past him and flew past. Daki had just dodged the big frog's attack, and he immediately growled, "Die for me." As he spoke, Daki had already used all his strength to throw the broken bough in his hand towards the big frog. Daki was an archer. Naturally, his accuracy was not to be questioned. Coupled with his strong inner force, when he used all his strength, how could he be underestimated? The broken bough that Daki threw was like lightning. It pierced through the big frog's mouth, and came out from the back of its head. It was stuck there just like that. Seeing this, Zhang Yuntao naturally did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly took a few steps forward and came in front of the big frog. He waved the steel knife in his hand and slashed 5 times at lightning speed. Then, he stepped hard on the ground and retreated in a flash. Croak, croak, the giant frog that was slashed by Zhang Yuntao immediately let out continuous blood-curdling screams. At this moment, the attack from the other fork also arrived. Just as Zhang Yuntao retreated, a ball of mucus flew out from the darkness. However, when Zhang Yuntao retreated, the ball of mucus hit the big frog's body. Croak, croak. After the big frog was hit by the ball of mucus, it suddenly let out a strange scream. In just a moment, the big frog's scream stopped. Its huge body also fell to the ground and did not move anymore. Chapter 67. Daki and Zhang Yuntao let out a long sigh of relief when they saw the underground poison frog fall. However, they still didn't dare to let down their guard because there was another big frog hidden at the other side of the fork. Daki walked to the side of the wall and took out an arrow. He hooked the clothes he threw away on the ground and slowly pulled it back. After retrieving the clothes, Daki reached out and picked it up. He looked at it and found that the place where the venom sprayed had already corroded a big hole. Looking at the corroded hole, Daki thought for a moment and folded the clothes again. He then took out 2 arrows and placed them on the left and right sides of the clothes, forming something like a flag. Zhang Yuntao saw this and immediately understood Daki's idea. He hurriedly lowered his voice and asked, "Second brother, do you want to rush up like this?" Daki nodded. "I've been paying attention just now. Although the venom is very corrosive, it didn't penetrate the clothes after hitting it. So, I want to try." Zhang Yuntao heard this and immediately became anxious. If Daki succeeded, it would be fine. If he failed, wouldn't he die without a doubt? Daki saw that Zhang Yuntao still wanted to persuade him and waved his hand. "I'm just trying. It doesn't matter. Don't worry, I'll be careful." After saying this, Daki didn't wait for Zhang Yuntao to answer. He picked up the clothes with one hand and an arrow with the other hand and walked towards the fork in the road ahead. Zhang Yuntao saw that it was useless to persuade him anymore. He could only carry the steel knife and walk closely behind Daki, ready to support him at any time. Although Daki said it casually, he was actually very nervous. He also knew very well that if the poison attack of the giant frog could penetrate the clothes, then he would be finished. It could be said that he was only separated from death by a piece of cloth. Hodaki picked up the clothes in his hand and stared at the front with his eyes wide open. As long as he walked to the front of the fork, he would definitely not hesitate and immediately throw the arrow in his hand. At this time, the passage was very quiet. Hodaki felt that only his heartbeat was left in this passage, constantly echoing in his ears. Just as Hodaki walked to the side of the fork in the passage, the underground poison frog hiding inside launched an attack. A ball of mucus flew out from the darkness and hid Hodaki's clothes, but it did not make any sound. Hodaki only felt his clothes tremble violently for a moment before everything returned to normal. At this moment, Hodaki didn't dare to be negligent. Almost subconsciously, he quickly threw out the arrow in his hand. Not only that, as soon as the arrow left his hand, he immediately took out another arrow and threw it out. Cuckoo! A few screams immediately came from the dark fork. Just as Hodaki was about to go forward, he suddenly realized that the clothes in front of him had been corroded and had a big hole. Seeing this, Hodaki didn't dare to move forward anymore. If the giant frog launched another venom attack at this time, there would be nothing to block it. Just now, Hodaki had been able to challenge the giant frog with the clothes covering his body. Now that there was nothing blocking him, Hodaki would be courting death if he went up to challenge the giant frog. Hodaki looked at the big hole in his clothes and didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly took 2 steps back, away from the threat of the fork in the passage. Although Hodaki had retreated, Zhang Yuntao didn't dare to be negligent. Just now, the underground poison frog jumped out angrily because it was shot by Hodaki's arrow. It wanted to take revenge. Zhang Yuntao stared at the entrance of the passage, afraid that the underground poison frog would suddenly run out and spray venom at the two of them. However, after waiting for a while, the two of them didn't see any underground poison frog running out from the fork in the passage ahead. They couldn't help but feel puzzled. "Second brother, was that big frog killed by the arrow you threw just now?" Hearing this, Hodaki shook his head. "I don't know. It was dark inside and I couldn't see anything. I could only hear the giant frog's screams, but I don't know where it was shot." After waiting for a while, there was still no movement in front of them. Zhang Yuntao couldn't help but smile. "Second brother, it seems that the giant frog was either shot to death or scared away by you." Hodaki shook his head. "Don't be careless. It's better to be careful." Hearing this, Zhang Yuntao looked at the fork in front and said in a low voice, "Second brother, why don't you wait for me here and I'll go there and take a look?" Hodaki shook his head. "No, if that giant frog has been hiding inside, wouldn't that be terrible?" Hearing this, Zhang Yuntao felt a chill in his heart. He couldn't help but ask, "Second brother, what should we do?" Hodaki looked at the fork in front of him and kept thinking of a solution in his heart. It was impossible to not go to the front and take a look. They couldn't keep wasting time here. How could they get there? Hodaki looked around and suddenly saw the giant frog on the ground. His heart suddenly moved. He hurriedly turned his head to look at Zhang Yuntao and said in a low voice, "Wait a minute, I'll throw that giant frog over. If there's still a giant frog in the fork, it will definitely attack it." Hearing this, Zhang Yuntao nodded and put the steel saber back into the scabbard. He said with a smile, "Second brother, let me do it this time." Hodaki nodded. "Okay, you have to be more careful." Zhang Yuntao smiled and turned his head to look at the fork in front of him. Then he looked at the giant frog on the ground. He thought for a moment and immediately took a deep breath. Then he jumped forward and jumped in front of the giant frog. He reached out and grabbed the giant frog and threw it toward the fork in front of him. As soon as Zhang Yuntao threw the giant frog in his hand, he immediately jumped back. As for the situation at the fork, with the giant frog in the air blocking him, he couldn't see it. It was useless to stay there any longer. Although Zhang Yuntao couldn't see the situation at the fork, Hodaki could see it very clearly. As soon as Zhang Yuntao threw the giant frog over, Ho Daki saw a black shadow fly out from the fork and hit the giant frog that flew over. In just a moment, the giant frog that was still in the air was corroded and emitted a white gas. Seeing this situation, Ho Daki's heart was filled with horror. If he had rushed over blindly just now, then the giant frog's venom attack would have hit both of them. Zhang Yuntao, who had retreated, was secretly glad. Just now, if his second brother didn't stop him from going forward to investigate, then he would have been hit by this ball of venom. Thinking of the consequences of being hit by this ball of venom, Zhang Yuntao only felt a chill in his heart. He couldn't help but shiver. Chapter 68. Ho Daki threw away the corroded clothes in his hand and looked at the fork in front of him vigilantly. Just now, the big frog in the other fork jumped out to attack him because he threw an arrow at it. This time, he had to be careful. However, after waiting for a long time, he didn't see the big frog jump out from the fork. Ho Daki was puzzled. Zhang Yuntao saw that the big frog didn't jump out and was a little impatient. He also took off his coat, held it with his knife, and stretched it towards the fork. Just as Zhang Yuntao was about to move forward to test the waters, he suddenly heard the faint sound of something landing on the ground from the previously cleared fork. In such a dangerous place, Zhang Yuntao naturally didn't dare to be careless. After he heard the sound, he immediately jumped back. He didn't even bother to pick up the coat that fell to the ground. Fortunately, Zhang Yuntao didn't pick up the coat that fell to the ground. When he jumped away from the spot, a ball of mucus flew out from the mouth of the passage like lightning and hit the place where Zhang Yuntao was originally standing. Looking at the sizzling rock that was corroded, Zhang Yuntao's forehead suddenly dripped with cold sweat. He secretly rejoiced in his heart. Fortunately, he ran fast enough. Otherwise, he would end up like the rock. In the dark fork, after the ball of venom was spat out, there was no sound. In the passage, peace was restored again. Although the passage was quiet, Ho Daki and Zhang Yuntao's mood was absolutely not calm. The two of them looked at each other and shook their heads with a bitter smile. After a long while, Ho Daki sighed and said in a low voice, "Third brother, let's go back and tell big brother about what happened here and see what he thinks." Zhang Yuntao nodded. He also knew in his heart that with just the two of them, they would definitely not be able to pass this level. The two of them made up their minds and slowly retreated until they reached the third fork that they just entered. The two of them then dared to turn around and go back the way they came. The way back was very safe. Along the way, they didn't encounter any monsters. Even so, Ho Daki and Zhang Yuntao didn't dare to be careless. After fighting with the giant frog for a while, the two of them had a feeling that every tree and bush was an enemy. Even the slightest sound would make the two of them alert for a long time. After a while, the nervous Ho Daki and Zhang Yuntao finally saw the big space they had come out of. They immediately relaxed, feeling as if they had just escaped death. After Ho Daki and Zhang Yuntao left, Mu Hongyi waited anxiously. Although Ho Daki and Zhang Yuntao's martial arts were good, it was still not enough here. After waiting for a long time, just as Mu Hongyi was getting impatient, he finally saw Ho Daki and Zhang Yuntao return to the large space. After Mu Hongyi saw the two of them, he hurriedly walked over and asked, "How is it? Is this passage safe?" Hearing this, Ho Daki shook his head and recounted what had happened in the passageway. After Mu Hongyi listened carefully, his heart sank. He originally thought that the big bat and the big mouse were already powerful enough, but he didn't expect that there would be a big frog that could spray venom. Not only that, it seemed that the number of big frogs was definitely not small. Mu Hongyi couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart at the thought of countless big frogs spraying venom at him at the same time. What should I do? If I go back, I will encounter those big bat. If I go forward, I will encounter those big frogs that can spray venom. What should I do? The monsters on both sides are very powerful. Neither side is easy to provoke. What should I do? Mu Hongi was so anxious that cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He looked at the last remaining passage and kept praying in his heart, hoping that they wouldn't encounter more powerful monsters. At this time, everyone also heard the news. For a moment, they fell into silence. Everyone was thinking, which way should they go? In the end, everyone's eyes were on the last passage. This passage was everyone's only hope of escaping. Going back, there were countless big bats blocking the way. On the other side, there were powerful big frogs blocking the way. If they couldn't get out of the last passage, I'm afraid, after a long while, Mu Hongi slowly said. Since there are big frogs blocking the way, let's take another passage. Hearing this, everyone nodded silently. At this moment, this was the only way. Everyone had no other choice. They could only pray that there wouldn't be any powerful monsters in this passage. In fact, the monsters they encountered after entering the passage weren't very powerful. With Mu Hongi's skills, dealing with hundreds of big bats or hundreds of large-toothed rats was absolutely no problem. However, numbers were a big problem. Whether it was the big bats or the large-toothed rats, their numbers were almost endless. No matter how strong one's combat power was, they would probably be overwhelmed by this endless number. Even the big frogs that could spray venom weren't that strong. The key was that these things hid in the dark and used their venom and tongues to sneak attack you. This was very troublesome. Seeing that no one had any objections, Mu Hongi waved his hand and took the lead to walk toward the last passage. Hodaki and the others didn't dare to neglect. Seeing that their big brother had left, they hurriedly chased after him. Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming looked at each other and shook their heads with a wry smile. They all understood that if there were any more powerful monsters in this passage, they would probably never be able to get out. Zhang Meng didn't care. If everyone really couldn't get out in the end, he could just open up another passage and let everyone out alive. Seeing that everyone had walked into the passage, Zhang Meng also followed leisurely and walked into the passage. Everyone left the big space and walked into the passage. Mu Hongi, who was walking in front, didn't dare to be careless. He always circulated his internal energy throughout his body to guard against any danger that might appear at any time. Hodaki and Zhang Yuntao were even more careful. Ever since they saw the big frog's venom attack, they would almost immediately think that there was a big frog hiding in the shadows on the walls. Everyone walked in fear for an unknown period of time. Just when everyone felt that there shouldn't be any danger, Mu Hongi, who was walking in front, suddenly waved his hand at the people behind him, indicating for them to stop. Everyone was shocked when they saw Mu Hongi waving his hand. They hurriedly stopped and looked at the passage in front of them. Mu Hongi didn't look at the passage in front of him. He was looking at his feet. A killed large-toothed rat. Further away, there were even more killed large-toothed rats. Seeing this scene, a glimmer of hope suddenly surged in Mu Hongi's heart. Chapter 69. Mu Hongi had checked the wounds of these rats. They were probably injured by swords and knives. Only humans could use swords and knives. Although humans had enemies too, at this moment, even if they were enemies, Mu Hongi would still feel close to them. As long as he didn't have to face monsters like bats and rats again, he would be fine. Hodaki saw Mu Hongi lowering his head and pondering. He quickly walked up to him and said in a low voice, "Big brother, I'll go ahead and take a look." Mu Hongi nodded. "Second brother, thank you for your hard work. You have to be careful too." Hodaki responded and walked forward with the broken bow in his hand. After walking for a short distance, Hodaki found even more rats. The further he walked, the more rats there were. In the end, Hodaki almost had no place to walk. At this moment, Hodaki couldn't care less. He stepped on these rats and walked forward. Finally, the number of rats decreased. They didn't decrease slowly, but they disappeared all of a sudden. Hodaki looked at the traces on the ground and guessed that someone must have fought with these large-toothed rats here. Someone was obstructing the large-toothed rats here, stopping them from moving forward. Seeing that they could kill so many rats, Hodaki guessed that these people must be quite powerful. Thinking of this, Hodaki didn't waste any more time and walked forward again. Along the way there were no more rats. Even so, Hodaki didn't dare to be careless. Who knew what kind of monsters were hiding in this dark tunnel? After walking for a long time, Hodaki, who had been trying his best to move forward in the tunnel, suddenly stopped. His face was full of joy. "I'm out. I'm finally out of this damn place." Hodaki was stunned for a moment. He immediately took big steps and ran towards the light in front of him. There was only darkness in the tunnel. If there was light, it must be the entrance of the tunnel. With this thought, Hodaki ran all the way. Soon, he was not far from the entrance of the tunnel. At this moment, he suddenly heard a voice. He was shocked. He quickly stopped and listened carefully. "Captain, when do you think the Raymond family's people will arrive?" "I don't know. I don't think they'll arrive today. Even if they're fast, I think they'll have to wait until tomorrow." Hearing the conversation outside, Hodaki felt that it sounded familiar. He thought about it carefully and suddenly remembered. The voices outside, weren't they the people who had fought with him yesterday? Now that he knew that the people outside were enemies, Hodaki didn't dare to be careless. He carefully retreated until he was far away and couldn't hear the sounds outside anymore. Then he turned around and ran back the way he came. Now that he knew there were no monsters in this tunnel, Hodaki ran as fast as he could and soon returned to the group. Seeing Hodaki's anxious appearance, Muhongi's heart sank and he hurriedly asked, "Second brother, did you encounter a monster?" Hodaki shook his head. "There are no more monsters ahead. We'll be outside soon." Everyone rejoiced when they heard this. However, Muhongi asked when he saw Hodaki's worried expression, "Is there any other danger?" Hodaki said, "Big brother, do you remember the group of people who fought with us yesterday?" Muhongi nodded. "Of course I remember. Why?" Hodaki said, "Those people were guarding the entrance of the tunnel." Muhongi was shocked when he heard this. He hurriedly asked, "Second brother, did you see clearly? Were they really those people?" Hodaki nodded. "Although I didn't see them with my own eyes, from the sound, it was definitely them." Muhongi pondered when he heard Hodaki's affirmative answer. Why were those people at the entrance of the tunnel? Were they waiting for him? Were they waiting for him to come out of the tunnel to ambush him and the others? No, how did those people know that he would come out from this tunnel? So far, Muhongi knew that there were two tunnels that led to the outside. One was the tunnel that they had entered halfway up the mountain and the other was the tunnel in front of him. If those people really wanted to ambush him and the others, how could they have thought that he and the others would come out from this tunnel? No, it shouldn't be like this. Thinking of this, Muhongi suddenly thought of the killed large-toothed rats in front of him and his heart skipped a beat. Could it be that these large-toothed rats were killed by them? They had originally wanted to come in from this tunnel, but they had encountered a large number of large-toothed rats. After a fierce battle, they had retreated from this tunnel. Thinking of this, Muhongi looked at Hodaki and asked, "Second brother, what did they say? Did you hear it?" Hodaki shook his head. "I only heard them say that they seemed to be waiting for someone from the Raymond family. This person from the Raymond family should be here tomorrow at the earliest." Muhongi felt that he had guessed right. They must have encountered these large-toothed rats. Seeing that they couldn't rush in, they retreated and guarded the entrance of the tunnel. When reinforcements arrived, they would enter the tunnel together. Thinking of those people outside, Muhongi's heart skipped a beat. Weren't those people thinking the same thing as him? They also wanted to wait for reinforcements to arrive before coming in to explore. If that was the case, their strength might not be as good as his side. At the very least, he and the others had entered from the first tunnel and rushed here, but they were blocked not far away. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi increasingly felt that the other party's strength was not as good as his side. Since the other party's strength was not as good as his side, there was nothing to be afraid of. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi turned to look at everyone. Let's go out now. If those people outside dare to stop us, don't hold back. Get rid of them as soon as possible. Everyone nodded when they heard this. If it was just dealing with some enemies, there was nothing to be afraid of. It was much better than facing an endless number of bats and large-toothed rats. Seeing that everyone was ready, Mu Hongyi waved his hand and said in a deep voice, "Let's go. Let's go out." Everyone responded and followed behind Mu Hongyi as they walked towards the entrance of the tunnel. Everyone passed by those large-toothed rats that had been killed and walked for a long time before they saw the light at the entrance of the tunnel. Seeing this light, everyone's spirits were lifted. They were finally out of this damned place. Fan Shouwu even secretly swore in his heart that he would never come to this place again. Even if he was beaten to death, he would never come again. Seeing that the light was getting closer and closer, Mu Hongyi turned his head and whispered, "We're almost out of the tunnel. We're almost out of the passageway. Everyone, be careful in case those people outside suddenly attack us." Hearing this, everyone responded in a low voice and took out their weapons, ready to fight. Chapter 70. Seeing that everyone was ready, Mu Hongyi took the lead and walked out of the passage with the cold light sword in his hand. The fierce Wind Mercenary Corps, who were waiting for reinforcements at the entrance of the passage, were shocked to see so many people suddenly appear. Green was the first to react. He immediately stood up, pulled out his two-handed sword, and pointed at Mu Hongyi. "Who are you?" Green's words stopped abruptly halfway through. He recognized these people coming out of the passageway. Weren't they the people from the Anwu Kingdom who had fought with him on the way here? Thinking that the other party could actually come out of the passage, Green was shocked. He hurriedly waved his hand and commanded the mercenaries to retreat a few steps before asking again, "How did you come out of there?" Hearing this, Mu Hongyi did not answer the other party's question. He directly raised the cold light sword in his hand and pointed at the other party. "How did you come here?" Green had entered the passage before and naturally knew how powerful the monsters in the passage were. At this time, seeing that the other party could actually come and go freely in the passage, he was already a little scared and did not want to fight. Seeing that the other party asked, he did not hide anything and directly answered, "We came here and found this passage. In the end, after we entered, we were stopped by those large-toothed rats. We had no choice but to retreat." Hearing this, Mu Hongyi was slightly relieved. After a few battles with the big bats and big rats, he did not want to fight anymore. Could it be that those large-toothed rats in the passage were killed by you? Hearing this, Green nodded. "Yes, we killed them, but there were too many of those big rats. Although we killed so many, we still could not rush in." Speaking of this, Green paused and then asked, "What about you? How did you come out of the passage?" Hearing this, Mu Hongyi thought for a while. There was no need to hide the places that he had been to. Moreover, Hodaki also heard from them that the other party's reinforcements would arrive soon. At that time, the other party would definitely find the passage. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi pointed at the mountain and said, "We came down from above." Hearing this, Green's eyes suddenly narrowed and he hurriedly asked, "Did you enter from the mountain?" Mu Hongyi nodded. "Yes." Green asked, "Are there no big rats in the passage on the mountain?" Mu Hongyi shook his head. "No, but there are some big bats." Hearing this, Grim was stunned at first, then asked, "Are those big bats very big too?" Mu Hongyi nodded. "Not only is it big, but it's also red." At this point, Mu Hongyi asked, "What are you doing here?" Seeing that the other party was indeed not here to attack his mercenary group, Green did not hide it and directly replied, "We have already sent the news back, and are now waiting for reinforcements. At this point, Grim laughed bitterly. Actually, we can't be considered reinforcements. Our mission is to find out the whereabouts of the Nightmare Eagle. We're only staying here to see if we can get some benefits. Mu Hongi nodded when he heard this. There was nothing strange about this. Everyone thought so. At this point, everyone had basically understood each other and also understood that the other party did not have any malicious intentions. Green pointed at the roasting food on the fire behind him and said with a smile, "Why don't we all get together for a drink?" Mu Hongi shook his head. Although he was certain that the other party would not attack him, he still needed to be on guard. "Thank you, but I want to go to the passageway on the mountain to have a look." Hearing this, Grim did not stop him. After all, they were not on the same side. There was no harm in keeping a distance between them. Mu Hongi led everyone safely back to the passageway halfway up the mountain. Only then did he feel slightly relieved and let everyone rest where they were. Everyone sat in front of the passageway and looked at the dark passageway. They felt as if they had been separated for a lifetime. Everyone knew that everything that had happened in the passageway had just happened. At this time, they felt that it was unreal. It was as if the scene of the life and death battle in the passageway was just a dream. After everyone sat down to rest, Mu Hongi took out a paper talisman. After looking at it for a long time, he sighed. Then, he silently operated his magic skill and poured his internal energy into the paper talisman. After a long while, the paper talisman in Mu Hongi's hand slowly turned into ashes and disappeared in the air. When Mu Hongi had just raised the paper talisman in his hand, Zhang Meng had noticed it. When the paper talisman turned into ashes, Zhang Meng looked at it more carefully. Zhang Meng vaguely saw that when the paper talisman in Mu Hongi's hand turned into ashes, it did not disappear. Instead, it turned into a faint shadow. This faint shadow slowly rotated around Mu Hongi's hand. Then, it turned into a stream of light and rushed into the sky like lightning, disappearing into the horizon. Seeing such a strange scene, Zhang Meng hurriedly pushed Fan Shouwu beside him and asked, "Fan Gongzi, just now, what was that paper in Lord Mu's hand?" Fan Shouwu had already seen Mu Hongi when he had just picked up the paper talisman. At this moment, when he heard Zhang Meng's question, he smiled and replied, "It's nothing. It's just a sound transmission talisman." Speaking of this, Fan Shouwu paused for a moment before explaining. "Think about it, we are so far away from Anwu Kingdom. If we want to run back, it will take a lot of time to go back and forth. Therefore, when everyone has important matters to attend to, they will bring a sound transmission talisman with them. At the critical moment, as long as you inject your inner strength into the sound transmission talisman, it won't take long for the other party to know your location. If there are no accidents, someone will quickly rush here." Zhang Meng nodded when he heard this. He guessed that the stream of light he saw just now should be the sound transmission talisman flying back. After Mu Hongi sent the message back with the sound transmission talisman, he turned his head to look at the passage. After a long while, he turned his head to look at Fan Shouwu and said seriously, "You understand the situation in the passage, so I don't want to explain any more. I just want to say that you should go back with Prince Zhang. If you continue to stay here, I'm afraid that we won't be able to protect you. If something goes wrong, I won't be able to answer to the deputy prefectural governor." Fan Shouwu nodded when he heard this. Lord Mu is right. Our martial arts skills are too low here. Not only will we not be of help, but we will also be a burden to Lord Mu. I think that our best choice is to go back. Mu Hongi nodded when he heard this. At the same time, he felt slightly relieved. If Fan Shouwu insisted on not going back, then he really had no good way to force him to go back. Chapter 71. At this time, it was getting late. Everyone rested for a while and ate some dry rations. By then, the sky had already turned dark. There were no big trees or anything like that here. Even if they wanted to start a fire, it would be impossible. However, it was not comfortable to spend a night in a place full of dust. Mu Hongi thought for a while, and let everyone enter the passageway, and rest not far from the entrance. At the same time, he let everyone take turns to stand guard in the deeper parts of the passageway to prevent large bats from rushing over. That night, everyone had a rather peaceful time. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. Early the next morning, Mu Hongi found Fan Shouwu and urged him to hurry back. Seeing that Mu Hongi was urging him, Fan Shouwu did not hesitate and immediately led the people he had brought with him away from the entrance of the passageway and walked down the mountain. Seeing the backs of Fan Shouwu and the others leaving, Mu Hongi was completely relieved. Although there were dangers on the way back, it was much safer than here. Moreover, Fan Shouwu and the others also had martial arts. Even if they encountered some danger, they should be able to get through it safely. At this time, Ho Daki came to Mu Hongi's side and looked at the backs of Fan Shouwu and the others as they left. After a while, he said slowly, "Big brother, what should we do when the commander sends people here?" Hearing this, Mu Hongi shook his head. "I don't know either. Let's talk about it when the reinforcements arrive." To be honest, Mu Hongi was really hesitant now. He was very clear about the situation in the passageway. He had personally experienced how dangerous it was inside. In the face of endless monsters, as long as they relaxed even a little, they would immediately be drowned in the sea of monsters. Not only that, it would not be easy to escape even if they wanted to. The passageway was so dangerous. Did they still need to enter it? Mu Hongi was really hesitant. After thinking for a while, he still could not make up his mind. This was because there was still a thought in his mind. If there was some treasure in the passageway, then if he missed this opportunity, he was afraid that he would have no hope of advancing in his life. Although there should be reinforcements arriving tomorrow, would the reinforcements sent by the county governor's mansion really be useful? Could they really face the endless monsters? By now, Mu Hongi had some doubts. He suspected that even if there were reinforcements, they might not be able to defeat those monsters. Seeing Mu Hongi's hesitant expression, Ho Daki sighed and said, "Big brother, since you are hesitant, I think we should wait for the reinforcements to arrive and then go back." Mu Hongi heard this but did not answer. Although the passageway was dangerous, he knew that there would often be treasures hidden in the midst of great danger. At this time, Shin Feisher also walked to the side of the two and said, "Big brother, you can make the decision on this matter. No matter what decision you make, I will support you." When Mu Hongi heard this, he looked at Shin Feisher, who was almost wrapped up like a mummy. He was a little touched. No matter how Lao Wu usually behaved, his courage was commendable. It was not bad. After all, no one was perfect. Everyone had some shortcomings. However, after Mu Hongi heard Shin Feisher's words, his heart became heavier and heavier. If he entered the passageway alone, even if he encountered danger, he would only lose his life. However, if all four of his brothers entered the passageway with him, if they encountered danger, wouldn't they all be wiped out? In that case, how could he live up to his brother's trust? Thinking of this, Mu Hongi patted Shin Feisher's shoulder and said with a sigh, "Lao Wu, it's hard for me to make a decision now. However, even if I decide to enter the passageway, I hope that you can go back and not go with me." "What if?" As soon as Mu Hongi said this, Ho Daki interrupted him. "Big brother, don't say any more. Since we are good brothers, if we want to go, we will go together. If not, we will go back together." After hearing Ho Daki's words, Mu Hongi shook his head. "Second brother, I understand your intentions, but this time it is really too dangerous. I won't hide it from you. I feel that even if we have reinforcements, we might not be able to open this passageway." Speaking of this, Mu Hongi paused and said seriously, "After all, we have already entered this passageway. We are very clear about the strength of the monsters inside. Although the several elders of the county governor's mansion are much stronger than us in martial arts, I feel that they might not have a chance of winning in the face of countless large bats and those large rats. As soon as Mu Hongi finished speaking, Ho Daki added, "Big brother, don't forget about those large frogs. Those large frogs are hiding in the dark and we can't see them. Moreover, they can spit venom. I think that even the elders of the county governor's mansion might not be able to survive if they are hit by the venom." When Mu Hongi heard this, he nodded. Although he had never seen those big frogs, he had already heard Ho Daki and Zhang Yuntao talking about them very clearly. Especially the venom that the big frogs could spit, he had already remembered it in his heart. Mu Hongi said, "That's why I don't want you to enter the passageway with me. If there is any danger, I will be the only one." Hearing this, Shin Feisher shook his head. "Big brother, if we retreat when there is danger, are we still brothers?" Mu Hongi shook his head. "That's different. This time, I am stubborn. It has nothing to do with you." Ho Daki said, "Big brother, I think it's better if you don't go. If you go, none of us will be at ease to let you go alone. In the end, we will all be in danger together." At this moment, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Zhiyong saw that the few of them were talking fiercely and also came forward. Zhang Yuntao said, "Big brother, I feel that this passageway is really not a place we should come to. Not only are the monsters inside dangerous, the key is that the passageway is too small. Even if we want to fight, it will be very disadvantageous for us. If we are not careful, we will fall into the trap of these monsters. Big brother, why don't we wait for the reinforcements to arrive and let them go? We can go back or continue to look for the nightmare eagle. It's better than staying here." After hearing Zhang Yuntao's words, Ho Daki hurriedly said, "Third brother is right. Our mission this time is mainly to find the nightmare eagle. As for the matters in this passageway, let's leave it to the elders of the county governor's residence." Lan Zhiyong also advised, "Big brother, actually, we should be considered very lucky to have entered the passageway this time. First of all, when we reached the space of the large bats, we didn't know where those large bats had gone. That was why we were able to safely pass through there. When we reached the space of the large rats, if the passageway hadn't suddenly collapsed and blocked the passage of those large rats, I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to get out." Chapter 72. After Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming left, Zhang Meng naturally couldn't stay any longer. Speaking of which, he had come with Fan Shouwu. He couldn't possibly stay behind after Fan Shouwu left, right? Fan Shouwu led his men down the hill, turning left and right, and soon disappeared from the sight of Mu Hongi and the others. After walking for a while, Fan Shouwu suddenly stopped. He turned his head to look at Zhang Qiuming and said with a smile, "Prince Zhang, why don't you take your men back first?" Zhang Qiuming was shocked when he heard this. He looked at Fan Shouwu with wide eyes and asked in surprise, "Fan Gongzi, could it be that you still want to go back?" Fan Shouwu shook his head. "Go back? It's impossible to go back. Even if we go back, we will be chased back by Lord Mu." Zhang Qiuming was even more confused. He looked at Fan Shouwu and suddenly exclaimed after a long while, "Could it be that you want to look for the nightmare eagle?" After Fan Shouwu heard Zhang Qiuming's words, he nodded and explained, "We also went in to take a look at the passage. The nightmare eagle doesn't seem to be there, so I want to go to the top of the mountain to take a look and see where the nightmare eagle lives." Zhang Qiuming hurriedly waved his hand to stop him. "Fan Gongzi, you can't do that. The monsters in the passage are already so powerful. We don't know what's on the top of the mountain. I think it's better not to go. If we encounter danger, I'm afraid we won't be able to deal with it with just the few of us." When Fan Shouwu heard this, he said disapprovingly, "If we encounter monsters in the passage, we won't be able to escape even if we want to. However, even if we encounter monsters outside, I think it shouldn't be a problem as long as we are careful and don't be discovered by the monsters." After Zhang Qiuming heard Fan Shouwu's explanation, he became even more anxious. "Fan Gongzi, it's better not to go. The monsters here are too powerful. If we go to the top of the mountain, we won't encounter any other monsters. As long as the nightmare eagle sees us, I'm afraid we won't be so lucky again." When Zhang Qiuming saw that Fan Shouwu still wanted to speak, he hurriedly continued, "Fan Gongzi, I know you want the black feather cloak, but you don't have to risk your life like that. When we return, we'll think of a way to buy one. Why take such a risk?" When Zhang Qiuming saw through Fan Shouwu's thoughts, his face couldn't help but turn red. However, he still said, "Prince Zhang, don't try to persuade me anymore. You should lead your people down the mountain. I'm going to the top of the mountain to see if there are any opportunities. If there are any powerful monsters there, I'll naturally retreat." At this point, Fan Shouwu paused for a moment before continuing, "Don't worry. You know that I'm not the kind of person who doesn't know his place. If there's any danger, I'll definitely retreat." Seeing that Fan Shouwu was determined to go, Zhang Qiuming could only sigh inwardly. He helplessly said, "All right. Since you want to go to the top of the mountain to take a look, I'll accompany you. However, you must remember that if there's any danger, we must retreat." When Fan Shouwu heard this, he was immediately overjoyed. He grabbed Zhang Qiuming and said with a smile, "You're indeed my good brother. We can go through thick and thin together." When Zhang Qiuming heard this, he only felt bitterness in his heart. This time, it wasn't as simple as going through thick and thin together. Perhaps they would have to go through a mountain of blades and a sea of flames together. After speaking to Zhang Qiuming, Fan Shouwu turned his head to look at Zhang Meng. Just as he was about to speak, Zhang Meng spoke first. "Don't worry about me. I'll go with you. Since everyone came together, we should go back together." When Fan Shouwu heard this, he nodded repeatedly. "You're really a good brother. Don't worry. If there's any danger, I'll definitely lead everyone back. I won't let anyone lose their lives in vain." At this moment, old Luo had already caught up from behind. When he heard that Fan Shouwu wanted to go up the mountain again, he was so anxious that he was sweating profusely. "Young master, you must not go up the mountain again. If there's any danger, with our martial arts, we won't be able to protect you. Young master, let's hurry down the mountain and go back. We mustn't delay any more. We've been out for so long. I'm afraid that the deputy prefectural governor is already very anxious. If we delay any longer and there's danger, no one will be able to bear the responsibility." Fan Shouwu smiled and shook his head. "Old Luo, I know your intentions. However, you don't have to worry. I have the final say here. If there's any problem, I'll naturally take responsibility. I won't let you be punished by father. Don't worry." When old Luo heard this, he became even more anxious. He grabbed Fan Shouwu's arm and said loudly, "No, as a guard, I can't let young master take the risk. If you want to go, then let me go. Young master, lead everyone down the mountain and wait for me. When I understand what's going on at the top of the mountain, I'll go down the mountain and report to you. How about this?" To be honest, old Luo really didn't want to go up the mountain. The martial arts of the guards could be said to be the lowest among them. If there was any danger, with their martial arts, they wouldn't be able to protect Fan Shouwu. Therefore, even though old Luo knew that he couldn't stop the danger, he could only persuade Fan Shouwu to hurry back and go up the mountain himself. Fan Shouwu was touched when he saw that old Luo would rather go up the mountain himself than let him go up the mountain. However, even though he was touched, Fan Shouwu knew that with old Luo's martial arts, it was impossible for him to reach the top of the mountain. Fan Shouwu shook his head. "Old Luo, don't worry. I've already seen the terrain here. Look at the thick dust under our feet. Even if we encounter danger, as long as we hide in the dust, The monsters won't be able to see us." When everyone heard this, they hurriedly looked down. Sure enough, the dust under their feet was very thick. There were even 20 centimeters of dust in some places. Looking at the thick dust under their feet and seeing Fan Showu's expression, old Luo knew that he couldn't stop them even if he wanted to. He could only helplessly nod his head and stop talking. Zhang Meng also didn't expect Fan Shou to be so meticulous. He actually thought that if they encountered a monster, everyone would hide in the dust. Seeing that no one objected, Fan Shou nodded his head in satisfaction. He then waved his hand in the air and said loudly, "Let's go. Follow me to the top of the mountain and find the nightmare eagle." Hearing Fan Shou's high-spirited words, everyone helplessly shook their heads. It could be said that in this group, only Fan Shou and Zhang Meng wanted to go to the top of the mountain to take a look. The rest of them only wanted to quickly descend the mountain and get as far away as possible so that they wouldn't be affected by the danger. Fan Shou naturally didn't know what everyone was thinking. At this moment, his mind was filled with the nightmare eagle's feathers, or rather, the black feather cloak. Chapter 73. Fan Shou led the way in front and everyone followed behind him. The group of people once again set foot on the path up the mountain. In order not to be discovered by Mu Hongyi, Fan Shou deliberately led everyone in a big circle before walking up the mountain. This mountain was very high and everyone had taken a detour, so the journey was naturally much longer. The group walked until noon and they were only halfway up the mountain. Seeing that they were still far from the top, Fan Shou ordered them to rest and eat lunch while they were at it. Although there was not much prey in this place, everyone had brought dry food. Although it was not a lot, it was not a problem for them to eat a few meals. With dry food they could eat their fill. The only drawback was that there was no water on this mountain. The water that everyone had brought had long been drunk. They could only force themselves to eat the hard dry food to make do with a meal. After lunch, everyone rested for a while before continuing to climb up the mountain. The remaining part of the journey was still very long. Everyone walked until evening, but they still did not reach the top of the mountain. Fan Shou looked at the top of the mountain that was not very far away. Just as he was about to encourage everyone, suddenly, an eagle's cry came from the top of the mountain. His expression immediately froze and he hurriedly waved at everyone. At the same time, he lowered his voice and shouted, "The nightmare eagle has come out. Let's hide quickly." Everyone, who was already exhausted, heard the eagle's cry and Fan Shou's words. They immediately perked up and did not care much. They hurriedly rolled a few times on the ground, covering their bodies with dust. At the same time, they hid in places where the dust was thicker. Not long after, another eagle's cry was heard. Everyone was even more shocked. The nightmare eagle's voice was even closer to them. A moment later, everyone saw the nightmare eagle flying over where they were. Seeing the nightmare eagle above their heads, everyone did not even dare to breathe loudly. They stared at the nightmare eagle in the air, afraid that it would discover them. Fortunately, the nightmare eagle did not seem to discover them. It only quickly flew over their heads and soon disappeared into the dense forest in the distance. Seeing the nightmare eagle fly far away, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Everyone had already tasted the power of the nightmare eagle. Not to mention its physical attacks, just its ability to spit fire was something that no one could defend against. No one could guarantee that they would be able to survive after being hit by the nightmare eagle's flames. After waiting for a while, not only was the shadow of the nightmare eagle nowhere to be seen, even its voice couldn't be heard. Only then did everyone feel completely relieved and crawled out of the dust. Fan Shou glanced at the spot where the nightmare eagle had disappeared and whispered to everyone, "Everyone, work hard. Now that the nightmare eagle isn't at the top of the mountain, let's use this opportunity to quickly climb to the top of the mountain and see the situation there." When everyone heard this, they naturally did not dare to delay. Fan Shouwu was right. Now that the nightmare eagle had flown away, this place should be safe. Everyone once again set foot on the path to the top of the mountain. This time, Fan Shouwu was still leading the way. In order to reach the top of the mountain before the nightmare eagle flew back, everyone rushed all the way, almost exploding with all their potential. Finally, before the nightmare eagle returned, they climbed to a place not far from the top of the mountain. Seeing that there were only a few hundred meters left to the top of the mountain, Fan Shouwu wiped the sweat off his forehead and cursed softly. "Why is this lousy place so hot?" It was indeed very hot here. Everyone had just climbed here when they felt a gust of hot air blowing against their faces. Not only was the air hot, everyone felt that even the rocks under their feet were hot. However, this state had its benefits. When everyone sat on the rocks to rest, they felt as if they were sitting on a heated brick bed. It was warm and comfortable. Some of them were even lying on the rocks, enjoying the warmth. Seeing this situation and looking at the situation at the top of the mountain, Zhang Meng was a little puzzled. Why did the top of the mountain in front of them look like the legendary volcano? It was so hot here, and the rocks under their feet were also so hot. Could it be that the volcano had erupted again? Zhang Meng felt that something was wrong. If they really caught up with the volcanic eruption, it could be said that other than himself, everyone would be burned to ashes by the magma. Not only Fan Shouwu and the others, but even Mu Hongyi and the others would not be spared. Zhang Meng had seen volcanic eruptions on TV before. He knew that once a volcano erupted, its power was definitely not something that humans could withstand. However, Fan Shouwu and the others did not know. They had never watched the live broadcast on TV. They only felt that it was a little hot here and kept cursing. Zhang Qiuming walked to Fan Shouwu's side and said with some doubt, "Fan Gongzi, why is it so hot here?" Fan Shouwu shook his head. How could he know why it was so hot? He was still a little puzzled. Zhang Qiuming reached out to touch his feet and muttered to himself, "Even the ground is a little hot." The reason why Fan Shouwu told everyone to rest was because the last part of the road was not easy to walk. Although they were not far from the top of the mountain and were only a few hundred meters away. However, these few hundred meters were not easy to walk. In the beginning, the mountain that everyone climbed was still a slow slope. Gradually, it became steeper, but everyone could still accept it. However, in the last few hundred meters, it became even steeper. In some places, it had already reached a perfectly straight state. If they wanted to go up the mountain, they could only avoid the steep rock faces and find some places to climb. This process was definitely not fast. They could only find a way up the mountain bit by bit. Seeing that everyone's breathing had stabilized and that they had rested enough, Fan Shouwu decided to take advantage of the time when the sky was about to turn dark and quietly climb to the top of the mountain. Fan Shouwu stood up and looked at the crowd. He immediately waved his hand and said in a low voice, "Everyone, work harder. We'll leave now." Hearing this, everyone stood up and prepared to continue their journey. At this moment, old Luo suddenly walked quickly to Fan Shouwu's side and said in a low voice, "Young master, the nightmare eagle has already flown out for a long time. I'm afraid that he will suddenly fly back. If he sees us, it will be bad." Fan Shouwu was stunned and became even more anxious. He hurriedly said, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go quickly. When the nightmare eagle flies back, we'll climb to the top of the mountain." After hearing Fan Shouwu's words, old Luo shook his head. "Young master, I'm afraid it's too late. I think that the nightmare eagle will be back soon." Hearing this, Fan Shouwu was shocked and hurriedly asked, "Then what should we do?" As the mountain became steeper and steeper, the dust on the ground became less and less. When the nightmare eagle returned, there would be no place to hide even if they wanted to. Hearing this, old Luo looked at the top of the mountain and said, Chapter 74. Old Luo pointed to the mountain peak not far away and said, "Why don't we go to the back of the mountain and ascend the mountain from the other side? Even if the nightmare eagle returns, he won't be able to find us. I think that would be much safer." Hearing this, Shen Shouwu nodded and immediately waved his hand at the crowd and said loudly, "Let's go to the other side of the mountain." Everyone responded and walked around the mountain to the back of the mountain. At this moment, the sky was turning dark. Just as everyone reached the side of the mountain, Zhang Qiuming, who had been staring at the back, suddenly shouted in a low voice, "Everyone, hide! The nightmare eagle is back!" Hearing this, everyone hurriedly turned their heads to look. Indeed, not far away, the huge figure of the nightmare eagle appeared in everyone's line of sight. "Hurry up and hide behind the rock!" Seeing that the nightmare eagle had returned, everyone panicked. Luckily, they had already reached the side of the mountain, and there were some protruding rocks there for them to hide. Perhaps it was because the nightmare eagle was about to reach home that he let down his guard. Everyone hid in a panic. Even though it wasn't tight enough, the nightmare eagle didn't notice them and glided through the air towards the mountain peak. Once the nightmare eagle was completely out of sight, everyone finally relaxed. They cautiously came out from their hiding places and looked up to observe the situation. Only after confirming that the nightmare eagle had returned to his home did everyone relax. Zhang Qiuming's face was green. He looked at the mountain peak a few hundred meters away and his expression kept changing. After a while, he looked down at Fan Shouwu and said in a low voice, "Fan Gongzi, we can still make it if we retreat now. If we start climbing the mountain and get discovered by the nightmare eagle, it will be too late. Fan Gongzi, you have to think carefully. Do we want to go to the top of the mountain?" Fan Shouwu, who was originally full of confidence, started to hesitate after seeing the nightmare eagle again. Down the mountain or up the mountain? If they chose to go down the mountain, as long as they were careful, they should be able to return safely. However, Fan Shouwu was really unwilling to return empty-handed. However, if they chose to go up the mountain, it would be too dangerous. Fan Shouwu knew this all too well. Not to mention other monsters, just the nightmare eagle alone was not something they could handle. In the forest, the nightmare eagle's flames ignited the trees and caused a lot of trouble for everyone. However, it was these trees that blocked the nightmare eagle's flames, preventing everyone from being burned to ashes. In this place there was nothing. There was nothing to hide. If they met the nightmare eagle again, Fan Shouwu believed that no matter who the nightmare eagle attacked with fire, they would be burned to ashes. There would be no place to hide. Looking at the mountaintop a few hundred meters away, Fan Shouwu hesitated. Zhang Qiuming, who had been paying attention to Fan Shouwu's expression, was overjoyed when he saw his hesitant expression. He hurriedly tried to persuade him again. "Fan Gongzi, this place is too dangerous. It's not a place we should be. Let's take advantage of the fact that the nightmare eagle has just returned and won't come out immediately. Let's hurry down the mountain." At this point, Zhang Qiuming felt that he had not finished speaking, so he added on. "Fan Gongzi, I know you want to give Miss Fu a black feather cloak. I can understand your intentions. When we return, I will definitely find a way to help you find out where to buy it. When the time comes, I will buy it for you. This way, won't it be the best of both worlds?" In the beginning, after hearing Zhang Qiuming's words of persuasion, Fan Shouwu was really tempted. Just as he was about to make up his mind, Zhang Qiuming mentioned Miss Fu. When he heard Miss Fu's name, Fan Shouwu, who had already planned to leave the mountain, immediately felt his heart burn again. Miss Fu's beautiful face started to sway in Fan Shouwu's mind. At this moment, Fan Shouwu's fighting spirit was reignited. He thought that if he spent money to buy a black feather cloak for Miss Fu, it would definitely not reflect his intentions. Especially when he thought of Miss Fu's icy expression, Fan Shouwu felt that if he spent money to buy a black feather cloak for Miss Fu, she might not even accept it. However, Fan Shouwu was confident that Miss Fu would definitely accept the black feather cloak that he had risked his life to obtain. When he thought of Miss Fu, who was like an iceberg, receiving the black feather cloak that he had risked his life to obtain, this iceberg would definitely melt. When he thought of this, Fan Shouwu, whose face had already turned red with excitement, made up his mind once again. Go up the mountain, I must go up the mountain. Even if I am killed by the nightmare eagle, I must go up the mountain. Zhang Qiuming was shocked by the change in Fan Shouwu's expression. Just as he was about to persuade him again, he heard Fan Shouwu say loudly, Prince Zhang, if you want to go down the mountain, then go down the mountain. After all, it is safer to go down the mountain. When Zhang Qiuming heard this, he knew that things were not going well. He hurriedly asked, Fan Gongzi, what about you? When Fan Shouwu heard this, he raised his head to look at the mountain peak and said resolutely, I must go up the mountain and fulfill this wish. When Zhang Qiuming heard Fan Shouwu's words, his expression changed greatly. He hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed Fan Shouwu's shoulder as he said loudly, No, it is too dangerous to go up the mountain. If you go up like this, you will definitely die. If that is the case, even if you obtain the black feather cloak, what use will it be? When Fan Shouwu heard this, he turned to look at Zhang Qiuming and said solemnly, I think that if Miss Fu knew that I was killed by the nightmare eagle because I wanted to give her the black feather cloak, she would definitely cry for me. When Zhang Meng heard this, he suddenly felt a little speechless. He really did not expect that Fan Shouwu would be willing to be killed by the nightmare eagle in order to obtain a single tear from Miss Fu. He really did not know whether this kid was smart or stupid. If he was killed by the nightmare eagle, what use would he have for a single tear? How interesting! When Zhang Qiuming heard Fan Shouwu's words, he became even more anxious. Fan Gongzi, although Miss Fu is beautiful and alluring, it is really not worth it for you to take such a huge risk. You should reconsider. Fan Shouwu waved his hand and said with a smile, There is no need, Brother Zhang. It is very dangerous up the mountain. You should bring everyone back. I alone will be enough to go up the mountain. Zhang Qiuming shook his head. How can that be? No matter what, I cannot go alone. You should reconsider. Let's go down the mountain together. Although the nightmare eagle is powerful, we can go back and slowly think of a way to deal with it. When the time comes, we can come back to hunt. Wouldn't it be much safer? Chapter 75. Seeing that Fan Shouwu was not listening to his advice, Zhang Qiuming was already sweating profusely. He turned his head to look at old Luo and said loudly, Come and persuade your young master. It's too dangerous to go up the mountain. It's better not to go. When old Luo heard this, he hurriedly walked forward and said loudly, Young master, listen to Prince Zhang's advice. Let's go back. After we go back, we'll think of a way. Even if we invite a few experts, we can still settle this matter. Why do we have to take the risk ourselves? Young master, I think we should go down the mountain as soon as possible. Zhang Qiuming advised again, Fan Gongzi, let's go down the mountain. Didn't you see that even Mu Hongyi and the others are waiting for reinforcements when they face danger? They won't rashly go. You should think about it carefully. Let's go back. People were like this. In fact, if Fan Shouwu was the only one here, no one would persuade him otherwise. He might have gone back by himself. However, with so many people trying to persuade him, not only did it not have any effect, but it also stimulated his fighting spirit, making him feel as if his blood was boiling. At this moment, Fan Shouwu even had the illusion that he was the hero of this group of people. Seeing that everyone was still trying to persuade him, Fan Shouwu waved his hand impatiently, Don't try to persuade me anymore. Those of you who are willing to go up the mountain with me, I won't object. Those of you who don't want to go up the mountain with me, I won't blame him. Now you can choose for yourselves. When everyone heard this, they were dumbfounded. Originally, everyone had gathered together to persuade Fan Shouwu, but they did not expect that Fan Shouwu would actually let them choose whether to go up the mountain with him or go down the mountain with him. Everyone was speechless. How could they choose? They clearly had no choice. Even if Fan Shouwu's guards were beaten to death, they would not abandon Fan Shouwu and go down the mountain alone. If that was the case, they would die if they went back. Zhang Qiuming and his guards had no other choice at this moment. If Zhang Qiuming really abandoned Fan Shouwu and went down the mountain, then not only would their relationship come to an end, even the two families would hate each other. After Zhang Qiuming heard Fan Shouwu's words, he pondered for a moment before shaking his head with a bitter smile. Fan Gongzi, I won't persuade you anymore. Let's go up the mountain together. Fan Shouwu was overjoyed when he heard this. He immediately grabbed Zhang Qiuming's arm and said with a smile, "You are indeed my good brother. Critical moments, you are very reliable." Zhang Qiuming forced a smile on his face and sighed in his heart. "If I had a choice, I wouldn't go up the mountain with you even if you beat me to death." Fan Shouwu's father was the deputy county governor. In the South County, he was definitely a figure above everyone else. As for Zhang Qiuming's father, he was only the city lord of Qingmu City. The difference between the two of them was too great. If there was a gap between the two families because of this matter, then Zhang Qiuming's father's life would definitely not be good. It was also for this reason that Zhang Qiuming had no choice but to go up the mountain with Fan Shouwu. Fan Shouwu was overjoyed when he saw that everyone had agreed to go up the mountain with him. If he was allowed to go up the mountain alone, he would be a little afraid. If everyone went up the mountain together, even if it would not increase their strength by much, he would feel much more at ease with more people. In the end, Fan Shouwu looked at Zhang Meng and said with a smile, "The fierce brothers, you don't have to go up the mountain with us. I think you should know the way back." At this point, Fan Shouwu patted Zhang Meng's shoulder and said jokingly, "Don't get lost when you go back." Zhang Meng shook his head. "I'll go with you." Fan Shouwu was stunned when he heard this. He then said with a smile, "Okay, I won't stop you. Let's go up the mountain together. When we get the black feather cloak, I definitely won't forget the fierce brothers." Zhang Meng nodded and did not say anything else. He just turned his head to look at the top of the mountain. The sky was completely dark now. Only the waning moon in the sky was left, emitting a bright white light in the sky. Under the dim moonlight, the originally steep mountain peak looked like a cylinder covering the top of the mountain. Since everyone had already discussed whether to go or stay, they all focused on the last part of the journey. After a while, Zhang Qiuming said, "Fan Gongzi, the remaining part of the journey is too steep. It's too dangerous for us to climb at night. Why don't we wait until dawn to go up the mountain?" Zhang Qiuming's words made sense. In the last part of the journey there were places that were almost perfectly straight. If everyone wanted to go up the mountain, they would need to look for protruding rocks and then climb up. Climbing at night would definitely be difficult to see. Not only would the climbing speed be slow, it would also be quite dangerous. Not to mention anything else, there were not many paths for everyone to climb the mountain. They could only climb up in a single file. At this time, if someone in front accidentally bumped into a rock and startled the nightmare eagle, it would be a small matter. The key was that with so many people, the falling rock would definitely hit someone. Then, the person who was hit, no matter how injured they were, would definitely fall. Falling from such a high place would basically turn into minced meat. Everyone naturally understood this. After listening to Zhang Qiuming's suggestion, everyone agreed. Although Zhang Qiuming's suggestion was very practical, old Luo had a different opinion. Although climbing at night is very dangerous, the probability of being discovered by the nightmare eagle is also reduced a lot. Climbing during the day is safer, but what if the nightmare eagle flies out? The vision is so good during the day. The nightmare eagle will definitely discover everyone climbing. What should we do then? On flat ground, no one was a match for the nightmare eagle. Now that they were on a steep cliff, there was no way they could fight back. If we really encounter such a situation, we can't run even if we want to. After hearing old Luo's words, everyone fell into deep thought. Zhang Quming's words made sense, but how could old Luo's words not make sense? If they wanted to climb the mountain, they would not only have to face the steep cliff, they would also have to face the nightmare eagle that could appear at any time. Climbing at night, the vision was not good. It would cause them to hurt each other. Climbing during the day, although the vision was better, there was also the threat of the nightmare eagle. No one dared to doubt the eagle's vision. It could be said that as long as the nightmare eagle flew above them, they would definitely be discovered by the nightmare eagle. At that time, even if they wanted to block it, they would not be able to. At this moment, after listening to everyone's thoughts, Fan Shouwu was also a little dumbfounded. It was originally a simple matter, as simple as climbing a mountain. Who would have thought that there would be so much logic to it? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.